The Dashing Date, Do-Over Date Series, Book 5. By Susan Hatler. Chapter 1. I wouldn't say the popularity of my new upscale clothing boutique made up for the fact that my ex-fiancé cheated on me with my maid of honor, but it certainly took the edge off. I, Missy Peters, had gone from supermodel to business owner, and I liked this feeling. Moving 2 hours north of the small town of Blue Moon Bay to downtown Sacramento had definitely been a good move. But working from sunup to sundown to get my business off the ground this past month required that I start my day with a positive attitude, a sense of adventure, and a certain something called coffee. My high heels clicked along the busy city sidewalk at a fast pace as I headed toward my favorite coffee cart. An endless stream of people flowed past me, and a shoulder bonked mine. "Excuse me," I said, turning just as my pink heel caught in a sidewalk crack. I toppled sideways directly into the arms of a man waiting in line at Courtney's coffee cart. "I've got you," the man said, his voice a deep purr that made my belly flutter. "Nice catch," I said, feeling like a total klutz as I glanced up at my rescuer. Dark coffee brown eyes peered down at me. Gulp. The man's olive skin and dark hair made him the very definition of tall, dark, and handsome. Wobbling on my unsteady feet, I grabbed onto his powerful arms, noticing he'd managed to make himself even hotter by rolling up the sleeves of his button-down shirt. I knew this fabric well, and the shirt likely came with a hefty price tag, but he wore it with the grace of someone who felt at home in expensive labels. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone light and his lips twitching at the corners. Since I was in his arms and not sprawled out on the sidewalk, obviously I was more embarrassed than anything. "I mean, please." I'd walked international runways in heels twice as high and had never fallen, although I might have considered it if this guy had been there. Oh, man. It had been way too long since I'd had a decent date. "I'm fabulous, thanks to you." I straightened and then smiled, tucking my long, dark strands behind my ear. My heart seemed to forget how to beat in a normal rhythm, and I instinctively glanced at his ring finger, totally bare. After my breakup, I was only into casual dating and could never be too careful making sure a guy was actually single. He held up his left hand. "Nope, not married. Not even a tan line, see?" I let out an incredulous laugh at his boldness. "You could have accepted the glance as a compliment and not called me out about it. Maybe you've embarrassed me to the point of diminishing my interest." A smile crept across his lips. "You don't strike me as a woman who embarrasses easily." "That's certainly true," I said, holding my hand out and thinking this morning's coffee run was ramping up to be more interesting than usual. "I'm Missy Peters. Nick Zambini." He took my hand and gave it a light squeeze. "Nice to meet you, Missy. Do you check every guy's hand to see if he's married? Or am I lucky?" "Not every guy," I said, wondering if that made him the lucky one or me. I'd feel pretty happy if I could nab a fun date with this hottie and get out of the house for an evening or two. I'd been pretty cooped up this last month getting my store open. "So, I am lucky to make the cut." "How do you decide who to check?" he asked, his tone holding a bit of humor. The coffee line moved forward in front of us, and he swept an arm out in a gesture for me to go before him. "Handsome and polite? He'd definitely make a good date. He also seemed sophisticated. Maybe he could take me out to dinner and to the symphony." I stepped forward, keeping my gaze on his as I shook my head. "I'm not the kind of woman to reveal my secrets to someone I've just met." "Is that so?" he asked. I said, noting that I sounded confident and flirty, years of practice for this former supermodel. But after my bad breakup last year, I had to wonder what kind of woman I was now. Certainly a less trusting one. A woman not interested in a relationship. Although a casual date could be fun. A casual date with Nick, anyway. The people walked away in front of me, which had me finally at the front of the line. Behind the coffee cart, Courtney Carmichael's smile brightened as her brilliant sequin shirt caught the sun and threatened to blind me. She is an ex-attorney turned coffee cart owner after her husband divorced her for working 24/7. Now, she focuses on relationships instead of work with a relaxing job and always wears funky tops as a reminder to enjoy life. The coffee cart is Courtney's do-over in life, making me ponder whether my upscale clothing boutique, fashionably late, could be considered a do-over as well. Either way, I loved her sparkle, both inside and out, but I probably should have put on sunglasses. "Ah, Missy," Courtney said, before turning to the handsome man beside me. "And Nick. Wow. Two of my favorite people at once. You two have introduced yourselves, right?" "That we have," Nick said, grinning sideways at me. Missy also checked my ring finger and discovered I'm not married. "That's as far as we've gotten." "Thanks for pointing that out," I said, taking in the wicked look on his face that made me want to elbow him. Or kiss him. With those full lips it was seriously a toss-up. "Covering the important stuff first, huh?" Courtney gave a firm nod. "I approve." "Oh, look, what a darling puppy. My dear Atticus is at the groomer. Can you tell I'm missing him?" "I'm sure Atticus is having a great time," I said, turning in the direction she'd pointed and spotting an adorable yellow lab puppy on a leash held by a young boy. The puppy's floppy ears bounced as he tilted his head, checking out something across the street that appeared to interest him. My bet would be on food, but what do I know about puppies' needs? "The usual for both of you?" Courtney asked. "That would be fab. Thanks." I nodded and then peeked over at Nick right as he nodded at Courtney and then turned to me with a warm look that made my knees weak. 3 minutes. Courtney smiled at us and then got to work making our delicious beverages. I loved her upbeat attitude, especially considering how cranky customers could be before they'd had their morning coffee. Yikes. I, for one, was always grateful for the 20-ounce non-fat latte with 1 pump of sugar-free vanilla and a sprinkle of cinnamon that she made for me every day. I loved her friendly attitude and personal service. She strongly believed in making connections, and that gave a small-town feel to this metropolitan capital city of California. Courtney had once confided in me that relationships were more important than what money could buy, and that's when she became my favorite new person. I had money. Tons of it in the bank from my modeling days. But had that stopped my fiancé from hooking up with my maid of honor while we were planning the wedding? That would be a big no. Modeling had been fun, jetting to Milan and Paris from New York all the time, but I was 28 now, and what did I have to show for it? A beautiful portfolio, a fat bank account, over 1 million social media followers, and a lonely life of travel. The first 3 I was grateful for, but the 4th? I was so over it. I was ready to stay put, cultivate my friendships, and have some fun dates. Nick fit the bill for the 3rd item on the list. I nudged Nick. "You don't have to tell everyone that I checked to see if you're single. Besides, for all I know you could be engaged." "Not even close." He smiled down at me and lowered his voice for my ears only, prompting a shiver that shimmied down my spine. "Beautiful dress, by the way." "Thank you," I said, especially pleased at the compliment since the dress came from my clothing boutique a few blocks away. I smiled up at him as the corners of his mouth curved upward, and we were having a moment. Until an ear-piercing wail shrieked through the air. My eyes widened at the shrill sound, and I glanced over Nick's shoulder to see the boy from earlier standing with his fists balled at his sides as he continued his loud, upset cry. I glanced around the boy, expecting to see the Wicked Queen from Enchanted had appeared in her dragon wear, or something. Instead, I saw the cute lab puppy step off the curb into the street. "Oh, no!" My heart stopped and I gasped as a taxi wailed its horn as it barreled toward the pup. "Puppy!" I called, leaving my spot in line and racing toward the innocent unsuspecting puppy as fast as I could in my pink heels. I stepped off the curb, just as the puppy made it halfway across the street. "Wait. Stop. Heel." Did the puppy listen to me? Or even so much as look my way? That would be a no. He angled his little body like he couldn't decide which way to go in this four-way intersection. With a last-second burst of panic, I called out again in hopes of keeping him from charging into the oncoming traffic. I mean, the taxi had barely missed him. "Stop, puppy!" I called, my visual suddenly blocked by a bus, which, incidentally, had a photo of me in a swimsuit on it advertising bottled water from a mountain stream in Tahiti. "Yo, puppy. Cool it." The puppy stopped, turned back to look at me, his tail tucked between his legs. Without thinking, I hurried across the lane of traffic and scooped him up and cradled him to my chest. My heart pounded like a marching drum and I sucked in a deep breath to calm it. Cardio might be my friend, but the panic of seeing a puppy in danger was not. "I'm so glad you're safe," I told the lucky little dog, and he licked my chin as I hurried back toward the curb. I was in mid-step with my pink heel in the air when a shrill bell rang out of nowhere. Ring, ring, ring. I swung my head left in time to see a bicyclist heading straight at me full speed. He applied his brakes but still skidded toward me as my jaw dropped and I froze. My entire life flashed before my eyes in a series of snapshots, starting with that day in Rome when my ex-fiancé had proposed in front of the Colosseum, me looking into a full-length mirror in my custom designer wedding dress, and lastly a flash of me breaking it off with my toad ex, due to his infidelity. Moving to Sacramento was supposed to be my fresh start. Was this really how my life was going to end? Flattened by a bicyclist who was giving me the evil eye. Out of nowhere, strong arms scooped me up and yanked me out of the street's bike path just as the bicyclist raced by me. Holding the puppy to my chest, my heart pounded and I tried to catch my breath as those strong arms loosened now that I was safe. I glanced up into Nick's dark eyes and warmth threaded through my heart. "Are you okay? Did you get the number of that bicyclist? He needs a ticket or something," I joked. "Seriously, Missy? You both okay?" he asked. "We're not flat as a pancake, so yeah," I said, glancing down at the little pup who decided to lick my chin again, seeming unaware he'd almost become pavement splatter. I glanced at Nick, who wore a concerned expression, and I noticed he hadn't completely let go of me. "Really, Nick? I'm fine. Thanks to you. Again." His expression relaxed and a smile played at his lips. "We're making a habit of this. You're right. You've rescued me twice today and we haven't even had our morning coffee," I said as the puppy grumbled and yipped in my arms, his tail flopping as he tried to play. "Excuse you, boy," I said, staring down at the errant puppy. "You are trouble. I think he likes you." Nick rubbed the pup behind the ears before letting it chew on his knuckle for a second. Then he finally released his arm from around me and we turned around just as the boy and a man came toward us. "Thank you so much," the man said, introducing himself as the boy's uncle and requesting my business card so he could thank me properly. "You're welcome." I put the puppy in the little boy's arms, gave the uncle my business card, and the man thanked us both profusely. "Hold him tight, okay?" I told the boy, who nodded and promised that he would take better care of him from now on. "You're quite the hero," I told Nick as we walked back toward the coffee cart to pick up our drinks. "Saving a puppy and saving me twice, all before you've had your first cup of coffee." He gave me a sideways look. "Technically, you're the one who saved the puppy." Humble. I liked that too much. "I'll give you that one." "Generous of you," he said, chuckling, as we headed back to the coffee cart. So what do you do, Missy? I smiled, guessing he hadn't seen the bus go by with my face on it, which was actually refreshing. Some men got overly attentive when they found out I worked as a model, and their excessive interest in me seemed disingenuous. I own fashionably late. He arched a curious eyebrow at me. It's a clothing boutique. He squinted a little. I feel like there is a story behind that name. Maybe I'll tell you someday. I grinned up at him as we picked up our coffees, and I dropped a $10 bill and then lifted my cup toward Courtney as if offering a toast. She smiled and waved, already helping the next person in line as Nick and I moved out of the way. I was going to pay for these, he said, sounding a little surprised. The least I can do after you saved me twice. What do you do for a living, Nick? I asked. I own a few businesses, including Totally Fit. The gym one block over. I have friends who go there. Not you, though. I'd remember you. He gave me a side glance, a sudden spark lighting his eyes. What made you open a clothing boutique? I raised a shoulder. I love helping people look their best. Interesting. My motto is helping people feel their best. That's what my goal comes down to as well, I said, keeping my gaze on him as I took a sip of the coffee drink I'd almost forgotten I was holding. We should team up and have a business meeting, he said, his eyes locking with mine. My heart flickered in my chest. I could go for a date, business meeting. I'd dated a few guys since moving to Sac, but the casual dates bored me quickly. Nick was the first guy to make me feel warm, fuzzy, and excited. I debated turning him down, though, since I didn't want more than a date or two. But he was only asking me to a business meeting. That should be safe. Plus, it would be fun to get out. Opening a new business had proved stressful and exhausting. And as much as I enjoyed staying in with my roommate Michelle and the keyboard my writer friend was always attached to, I really wanted to get out. Bonus points for an outing with Nick's charming personality. His dark good looks didn't hurt either. How about the opera? I asked. A grin spread across his face. How are we supposed to talk business at the opera? I lifted my shoulders. There's an intermission, right? Friday night, he said. Agreed, I said. We exchanged phone numbers and then I hurried down the street toward my boutique since I was fashionably late, as always. Luckily, my manager was always on time. As I hurried along the sidewalk, I couldn't help the feeling of excitement rolling through me at the thought of seeing Nick again. Excitement over a guy was not good. As I arrived at the brick exterior of my store and walked under the black awning toward the front door with its gold lettering, I assured myself there was nothing to worry about. Friday night would just be a business meeting and a casual night out. That was all. Maybe I should also tell that to the butterflies going wild in my belly. Chapter 2. After 2 days thinking about Nick a lot, I wanted to see him again to decide if he was as handsome, intelligent, and charming as I remembered. Or maybe I was just fantasizing about him because I hadn't gone on a date in a while. Even though we'd exchanged numbers on Monday, he hadn't called me, and since I was on a relationship diet, I certainly wasn't going to call him. What to do? I figured a chance meeting would be best, so I decided to get coffee this morning at the exact same time I had gone on Monday when Nick and I met. Brilliant strategy if I do say so myself. Since I didn't trust my memory, I told my roommate she needed to come with me for verification purposes. Michelle Moss had grown up with me in Blue Moon Bay and she moved in with me here in Sac recently for a change of scenery so she could finish the novel she was having trouble completing. I wanted her to finish the book, too, since it wasn't pleasant to hear her banging her head against the keyboard so often when she was frustrated. So, I dragged her to Courtney's coffee cart in hopes of seeing Nick again and saving her laptop from destruction. Is that him? Michelle asked, her blonde ponytail bouncing from one shoulder to the other when she turned her head. I glanced at the cute guy Michelle pointed out and shook my head. Nope, not him. How about him? She pointed to the right and I scanned several guys in suits she could have meant. Nope, not him either. You said he's super cute, saved you from falling, helped you save a puppy, and yet you can't be sure if he's really as great as you remember? She asked, sounding suspicious. Are you making up Mr. Dreamy? Is he a figment of your imagination? Be honest. I won't judge. Much. His name is Nick. I scanned the crowd of business people heading to work, but didn't see Nick anywhere in the throng of pedestrians walking up the sidewalk from where his gym was located. And, no, I'm not making him up. At least I don't think I am. Sawyer. Michelle drew out the word for a few seconds and rolled her eyes, a playful smile on her face. Imaginary, I tell you. A side effect of the romance novel I'm working on. I talked about my hero one too many times, didn't I? Nick is real, I said, knowing she meant well, but her teasing didn't help calm my nerves. Still, it was nice having her around for moral support. Well, mostly. I'd been thrilled when Michelle had accepted my invitation to move in with me. I figured my penthouse apartment and its fabulous view of the city would be the spark she needed to get her muse talking. So far, not much luck, though. Michelle, while dramatic at times, was an incredible friend and I counted myself lucky to have her. What I hadn't expected was for Michelle to be more cooped up than even I'd been the past month. Seriously, she'd leave the house for her morning run and to get coffee and then she was glued to the keyboard. While there were days we'd go for coffee together, most days she'd get up at her own pace. Courtney caught my eye and lifted my coffee cup to let me know my daily drink was ready. I walked to the front of the line and took the cup. Thank you. Her sunny smile rivaled the brilliant sparkle of today's shirt. This time she'd toned it down a little bit, for her, anyway, with a sky blue shirt. On the front of the shirt a white sequined lily twinkled in the Sacramento sunshine. Non-fat latte, 1 pump of sugar-free vanilla with a sprinkle of cinnamon. Courtney brought her fingertips together and kissed them before flinging her hand toward the sky in an enthusiastic motion, her wide smile as bright as the morning. Then she held her finger up to Michelle and quickly made her drink. The woman had an incredible memory. You're too good to me, I said, inhaling the scent of Courtney's coffee. Delicious. She waved a hand at me. Not possible. Have you seen Nick? I lowered my voice and hoped I'd said his name as casually as possible. I'd really hoped to bump into him and introduce him to Michelle, but so far nada. Courtney gave me a humorous look, her smile widening. You're looking for Nick, huh? She asked, her voice a bit too loud as she flicked her gaze over my shoulder. My heart fluttered in my chest. He's right behind me, isn't he? She nodded, that grin of hers so big I expected her face to crack in half at any second. Glad this is fun for you, I said, sucking in a deep breath, turning around and coming face to face with Nick. I looked into those brown eyes and my heart skipped a beat. Nope, I definitely hadn't been imagining how handsome he was. Fancy meeting you here. Perhaps I came at this exact time hoping to run into you, he said, causing my belly to do a cartwheel at his directness. Oh, I stumbled, unsure of how to handle a man who wasn't playing games for once. Refreshing and unnerving at the same time. With quick hands, I grabbed Michelle and pulled her beside me. This is my friend, Michelle, I blurted. His gaze remained on my eyes. Hello, Michelle. Nice to meet you. Ahem. She cleared her throat. I'm over here, she said in a stage whisper, and he finally tore his eyes from me and glanced over at her. It's a pleasure, he said. Just like before, his rich voice warmed me up inside and sent a delicious shiver down my spine. I've heard so much about you, Nick, Michelle said, and I shot her a silent plea not to embarrass me. But she didn't so much as look at me. Oh, really? Nick arched an eyebrow at me, before smiling at Michelle. And what have you heard? That you save puppies and my friend here every chance you get. His rich laughter filled my ears and I decided I needed to hear that sound over and over again. I guess I'm at her service. Michelle's eyes widened and she smiled at me. Your own hero. In the flesh. Nick is hoping I'll help his business by combining forces with him, I said, deciding we needed to get on a safer topic. True enough. Nick focused on me with an intense stare in those dark eyes and all the oxygen left my lungs. Every last molecule gone. I was also hoping to run into you to confirm our plans for Friday night. You could have just called, I pointed out. The corner of his mouth lifted. I'm better in person. Is that so? I said, knowing I couldn't argue with that. He nodded at my dress. I'd gone with a pale pink today, something light and summery to help combat the Sacramento heat. Do you ever leave the house not looking your best? He asked me, that eyebrow arching. Warmth tingled like electricity over every inch of my skin, pleasant and exciting. His compliments sure hit the spot. She doesn't, Michelle said. On Sundays she stays in her pajamas until noon. This prompted a chuckle out of Courtney, who was making a customer's drink. I stepped away from her, licking my bottom lip. Do you always look your best? I asked, noting that today he looked dashing in a plum-colored button-down shirt of even better quality than the last and some designer slacks in a deep charcoal. He gestured with his hand. I'm Italian. Dressing my best is in my nature. Michelle's mouth made a perfect O of surprise and delight as she glanced at me, but I ignored her. I loved that Nick dressed well and the way he rolled up his sleeves really did something to my belly. The flex of his forearm as he casually shifted had me nearly drooling and the bulge of his arms nearly made me faint in the heat. Of course, if I fainted I'd blame the heat, but it would 100% be his fault. Do you know that Missy runs a clothing boutique? Michelle asked him. He snapped a finger. Fashionably late. You remembered. I smiled, wanting to squeal and jump up and down. But I restrained, since, that wouldn't exactly be playing hard to get. His warm eyes met mine. And you promised to tell me the story behind the name sometime. I bit my bottom lip. I didn't say when I'd tell you, though, did I? No, you didn't. He chuckled, turning his attention to my friend. So, Michelle, what do you do for a living? I'm writing a novel, which means I stare at a blank screen on my laptop for hours until I get frustrated and then watch TV. How about you? I'd already told her that he owned a gym. I own a gym in town, among other things. Oh, good news. Missy's been looking to join a gym. Haven't you been telling me that, Missy? She turned to me, blinking her eyes innocently, and I wanted to pinch her. I only mentioned that once. I tried to convey in a stern glance that she'd better knock it off right now, but she smiled at me and shrugged. Nick glanced from her to me and seemed to decide not to get involved in our mini feud. Beyond wanting to see you again in person, there's another reason I'm glad I ran into you again. Before our date, I'd love to discuss some business ideas I've come up with. Business ideas? I asked. I'd assumed the whole business meeting thing was a coy way of asking me on a date, but the more he said it, the more I began to believe he was serious. My stomach sank, but I tried to shoo the disappointed feeling away. Have you ever considered modeling? He asked. Michelle's head turned really slowly in my direction like an owl following a mouse far in the distance. You didn't tell him you were a model? She asked, sounding aghast. No, Nick and I have only met once. We didn't exchange each other's life history. Maybe we can do that Friday night, he said, his eyes glinting. Starting with your modeling. I'm an ex-model. I flashed a smile I didn't feel and tried to figure out an escape plan from this conversation. Great. Nick's grin from ear to ear put me on edge. I've got this new line of gym clothes I'd love for you to model for me. She's so good at it, Michelle said, making me want to escape right away. I was done modeling. I'd left that life behind to open up my boutique, and I promised myself I'd stick to my early retirement. Look at the time. I've really got to run, I said, making a show of glancing down at my phone. Michelle opened her mouth and I grabbed her arm. It was fun running into you, Nick. Nice to meet you, Michelle said, as I propelled her away from him. You as well. Have a good day, ladies, he said, looking a little surprised at my hasty departure. Once we were half a block away, I turned to her. What did you think? I asked. She tapped her cheek. On a scale of 1 to 10? I'd say he's a 25. I held my finger up. Not my imagination. I'll accept your apology. Ha. She shook her head, glancing behind her once. Why the sudden exit? I need to get to work, I said, as we moved toward fashionably late with quick steps, my heels clicking on the concrete. I blew out a breath. Plus, all he wants to do is talk about his gym and how we could both benefit by joining forces. Or how I could benefit his gym by modeling for him. But did you see the way he looks at you? She asked. Yes, but it wasn't in a special way. I pushed through the throng of people on the sidewalk. He just eyeballed me to make sure I have the right look for modeling his gym clothes. He wants to partner up and grow our businesses. That's all, I said, wondering why that was bugging me when that was all I wanted as well. Must be an ego hit. Michelle shook her head. I think he's interested in you for more than that. He listened to every word you said and his face lit up when he saw you. And his expression fell when you said we had to go. I have a good feeling about this one. You know I'm not looking for anything serious. I waved her off, taking a sip of my coffee. Although maybe a casual date here and there wouldn't be the end of the world. I'd been hurt before and I wasn't in a hurry to get hurt again. So I'd keep it casual with Mr. Dreamy. With Nick. Chapter 3. I hadn't been ignoring Nick's texts and calls all day. In fact, I'd been thrilled to get each and every one of them. But I'd been too busy at work to call him back. Those local ads I'd paid for must be really paying off because I had customers galore and they were buying up the store. As I shooed the last person out the door and went to lock it, a handsome face appeared on the other side of the glass before I could turn the deadbolt. I couldn't hold back my smile or stop the warmth spreading through my belly. With a grin, I pointed toward the posted hours sign that clearly stated it was 10 minutes past closing. He lifted his expensive watch toward the glass and I saw it said 10 minutes till the hour. Your watch is late, I said through the door, pulling out my cell phone. The clock on the screen clearly said 10 minutes past the hour. Or yours is early. His charming grin sent bolts of excitement through my belly. Satellites are not wrong, I told him, the corners of my mouth twitching. My keys were still in the lock, the deadbolt still unturned, and I smiled at him through the glass. The customer is always right, he said. You have a point. I bit my bottom lip to hide my smile as I opened the door for him. He stepped inside, his rich, thick cologne washing over me in a mouth-watering wave. He smelled like warm oak and rich wine, a combination that reminded me of cool evenings in front of a wood-burning stove, and when I closed my eyes, I found myself in a happy place. "I'm glad to see you again," I blurted, the words slipping out. "Likewise. I have a few things to do before I leave for the night." "I hope you don't mind," I said, moving toward a rack of clothing, arranging the color order from light to dark to be more appealing to the eye. He came up beside me as I shifted toward a shelf of previously folded shirts and pants I'd put together as complimentary sets that were now messed up from being browsed through by customers. I'd been so busy today there had been no time to straighten up, so now I got on it. I folded a shirt up neatly and tightly and noticed Nick pick up a shirt from the shelf that needed refolding. He glanced at me and then tried to mimic my motions, but wound up missing a couple of steps and the shirt ended up a lumpy mess. I stifled a laugh as he stared at the garment with a distasteful look on his face. "This is why I hang my clothes." "Let me show you," I said, taking the shirt and flattening it against my chest before modeling how to fold it step by step. Then I handed him another shirt and let him try. He improved, but still missed how to tuck the sleeves. I shook my head and reached for it, and our fingers brushed. Skittering tingles danced along my hand where his skin had touched mine. Stunned, I glanced at his face, noting the sudden simmer of heat in his eyes. "How's this?" He kept his eyes on mine and then folded the shirt perfectly in the first go. I gulped. "Perfect job. I'm a quick learner." "I can see that," I said, my heart hammering in my chest. I glanced away. "So, you came to talk business, right?" He nodded, but still paused a few moments before he said, "Totally Fit is more than a gym. We sell nutrition products, vitamins, and clothing." Okay, I listened, picking up another messy shirt. He did the same. "My motto is to help people feel their best." I smiled. "Mine is to help people look their best." "See," he said, his charming grin lighting up my chest. "This is why I think we should team up. Together we could help people look and feel their best. What's better than that?" "It sounds like a perfect combination," I said, hating that, despite my resolution about relationships, I felt less interested in having Nick as a business partner and more interested in dating him. I finished folding the shirt and picked up another one as he rearranged the stack to make it crisp and perfect. He was doing a great job and I was grateful for the help. "The perfect combination," he repeated, using a voice that sounded thick. "I'm not going to suggest diet and exercise to my customers," I said, wondering what plan he had in mind but getting that point out of the way. "I was thinking about more of a duo deal. They shop with you and earn a discount for my gym or products. And vice versa. My gym members get some kind of perk for coming to you. A cross-promotion to offer something to customers and give them a good deal." "Interesting." I picked up a pair of pants that had been haphazardly put back and was in serious danger of taking a tumble to the floor. He picked up another unfolded pair and mirrored my motion step by step with an eye for detail that I admired. He nailed folding the pants on the first try and I congratulated him. "So what do you think?" he asked. "About the pants?" "Great job." He shook his head. "No, the cross-promotion idea. Not sure this one's for me," I said, heaving a sigh. I wasn't hurting for business. My business had already ballooned to the point that I needed to consider hiring more help just to keep up. Well, unless I wanted to continue working 12-hour days. A line formed between his eyebrows. "Maybe you should visit my gym, Missy." "Are you trying to tell me something?" I asked, teasing him. "Not at all." He shook his head, a mischievous sparkle in his eyes. "I'd just love to personally give you the walkthrough. I bet you'll like my personal line of workout gear." "The clothing you want me to model?" I asked, a tiny bit suspicious. He nodded, adding another perfectly folded pair of pants to the stack. We'd managed to knock out all the folding in record time. Your friend mentioned you were looking for a gym. Would you like to join Totally Fit? Sure. I'd throw in the first month at no charge. I grinned. You thought I was going to say no, didn't you? He nodded, a sheepish smile crossing his face, but he didn't rescind the offer. I accept. Half an hour later, I was a guest at Totally Fit and wearing a new set of workout gear that Nick had given me on the house. I think cross-promotion would be mutually beneficial, he said, his charming grin flashing during his relentless pursuit of our collaboration. More weight, please. I gritted my teeth, deciding to use his nearly constant attempts for us to join forces and work together as the motivation I needed to hit my workout goals. I'd been out of the gym for a while and had lost more strength than I thought. Needed to get that back. Hey, boss, a big, fit guy said, as he walked up. The guy clearly spent a lot of time working out and it showed. I mean, his muscles practically had muscles. Wowzers. Steve. Nick nodded to the guy before focusing on me again. I channeled all my strength into my legs and pushed on the platform. I can take over here. Steve put both hands behind his back and rocked up on the balls of his feet. Somehow the gesture managed to be friendly and fun all at once. No, thanks. Nick turned back to me. You never train people, boss, Steve said. I'm getting special treatment? I asked, glancing over at Steve. Gold star treatment, I'd say. I'm Steve Burns. Our resident trainer. Missy Peters. Clothing boutique owner who needs to work out more than once a year, I joked. Well, you've come to the right place, he said, chuckling. While I concentrated on moving the weights, I listened to their casual exchange, absolutely fascinated by the back and forth. I really did want to work on getting back into better shape. I'd always believed it's good for the body and mind to keep fit and active. It didn't hurt that Nick was here too, by my side, counting for me and adding weights. Good set, Nick said, before glancing over at Steve. I've got this. It's fine. Thank you. Loud and clear. Steve put his palms up, before he finally walked off. Nick focused on me once more. I mean, modeling my line of activewear wouldn't be a big deal. Just one photo shoot, Missy. Say yes. More weight, please. Are you always this stubborn? He asked. If I said no, I'd be lying, I said, biting my bottom lip. Beautiful and stubborn. Lethal combination, he said, adding 2 more weight plates, 1 to each side, before coming back to my side and counting my sets. As I worked out, I told myself this was about keeping my body toned. Not about how adorable Nick was counting for me. Or that look of determination in his eyes every time I interrupted him to ask for more weights. Of course, I didn't interrupt every time. Most of the time I let him finish a thought before asking for more. Even though no part of me wanted a relationship, it bothered me that he didn't seem interested in going on a date with me. I'd had plenty of offers lately, too, mostly from guys that were excited I'd been a supermodel and I didn't want to date that type of man. I wanted a couple of fun dates with someone genuinely interested in me. And the spark between Nick and me didn't hurt, either. So, we talked about going to the opera, Nick said, out of nowhere. A little shiver rolled through me. I guess we did, didn't we? Yes. He nodded, his eyes sparkling with that mixture of mischief and warmth that captivated me and sent static tingles all up and down my arms. We did. I asked when we'd be able to talk business and you said there's always intermission. Sounds like something I'd say, I said, wondering why he'd brought up business again. I continued to move the weights once he nodded that it was time for the next set. He counted my reps, his hand briefly touching mine at one point. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through me and I glanced at him, nearly losing my focus and the weights. His eyes narrowed a tiny bit and I struggled to catch my breath. "Breathe," he whispered. I tried, I really tried. But my heart was racing in my chest and that wasn't entirely from the weight lifting. "I'd like to take you to the opera, Missy." I lowered the weights with only a slight crash and winced before internally doing a little happy dance in place. "I'd love to go to the opera with you, Nick." He lit up with a charming grin that turned my insides to goo and I decided right then and there that it was important I show him that a night out with me would be much more interesting than work. "Is that a yes, then?" he asked. I gave him a sideways glance. "Yes. It's a yes. Yes." Now that we'd confirmed our Friday night plans, I still had no idea if we were going on a date or if this was a strategy to talk to me at intermission. Either way, I was getting out of the house and going somewhere fun with the most captivating men I'd ever met. Chapter 4. The last few rays of sunlight slanted through the bathroom windows and lit up the particles of face powder swirling in the air as I got ready to go out with Nick. The fresh scent of my clean dress and light floral hints of perfume tickled my nose as I picked up my favorite mascara. I knew that soon the city lights would sparkle in the darkness, but I wouldn't be here to watch it as usual because I had a date. Nick promised to take me to the opera and tonight was the night. My feet did a little happy step and I took a deep breath to calm myself. I hate when the words just won't come. Michelle's voice flowed into the bathroom from where she sat on my bed. "I've been sitting in front of the screen and staring at it for hours. Nothing. My mind is blank. Nada. I'm canceling my date tonight," I said, peeking out in time to see her plant her head in her hands. She was the very picture of miserable and it made my heart ache. "Maybe we can do a Gilmore Girls marathon to cheer you up." "Don't you dare," she said, enunciating each word slowly. "Are you sure?" I wanted to be there for my friend, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't excited about this date with the mysterious, good-looking, work-oriented Nick. Once she nodded at me, I leaned into the mirror and swiped the petal pink color over my lips, which went nicely with my pink dress. "Yes, go have fun. No point in two of us being miserable. How about a little pick-me-up?" I asked, knowing she had no idea I'd snuck home a surprise for her. "What could possibly achieve that epic feat?" she asked, sounding so suspicious that I held back a laugh. "Aw, Michelle, ever the bristly roommate." I loved her to death and hoped she'd never change. I glanced over and found her watching me, her eyes wide and curious. "I brought home mint chocolate chip ice cream." She gasped and blinked at me. "How did you know that's my favorite?" "I have my ways." I knew that she'd been feeling down about the lack of progress on her book. Apparently moving here hadn't helped pull her out of her slump, and after a conversation with an old friend I'd asked for help, I'd learned the way to her heart. "It's in the freezer." "You're the best." She catapulted off the bed and raced into the kitchen. A moment later she popped back into my room, ice cream carton and spoon in hand. "So, how is Claire?" I giggled. "She's busy with her wedding dress design business. Ever since her Hollywood star sister's photo turned up in People magazine, her business has been off the hook. Plus, she's busy with Alex." "How are they doing?" she asked, talking through a mouthful of ice cream. "They're perfect, of course." I faced the mirror again, puzzling over what to do with my hair. I pulled it up into a loose twist and then let the dark strands fall forward to frame my face again. Claire and Alex had become engaged and were sublimely happy. Must be nice. I wouldn't know since the man I'd intended to marry had cheated on me with my maid of honor. I knew I should just be grateful to have dodged a bullet. With a frown, I pulled my hair up and pinned it in place with a beautiful rose clip set with pearls, then took it out and shook my head. Any idea what they've been up to? Michelle asked, panting and clutching the sides of her head, her spoon getting ready to drip ice cream into her hair at any second. Brain freeze? Yes, she said, wincing. You have to warm it up in your mouth before you swallow. Now you tell me. Anyway, Claire and Alex took a pottery class. Turns out Alex is a natural, but everything Claire touched she destroyed. She totally laughed at herself, and when we talked about it, Alex had been loud in the background about how she touched his perfect vase and turned it into a lump of clay, I said, letting out a laugh as I combed my hair back from my face and secured part of it while leaving the length to fall down my back. Weird. Michelle sounded amused as she resumed with another bite of ice cream. You'd think someone who makes wedding dresses for a living would be good at all art. I don't think she liked getting dirty, I said, raising an eyebrow. Claire had told me she'd taken a shower when she got home even though she'd washed her hands after the class too. Letting my hair loose again, I sighed. None of these hairstyles are working for me. Just wear it down, Michelle said, gesturing with her hand. Claire never did like getting dirty. How did she feel about Mr. Scientist being better at it than her? They laughed a lot, so I think she had fun and didn't care all that much. I sighed. Oh, to find a love like that. I loved my friend, but I felt jealous of her, too. Claire and Alex are a match made in heaven, and it shows. Whereas, I'm going out with a man who sees me as a business proposal. Michelle didn't say anything for a second. You mean Nick? I glanced at her. Of course I mean Nick. Did you think I meant Alex? I giggled and she lifted both shoulders and an eyebrow. You weren't clear. She set the carton of ice cream down on the bedside table and walked into the bathroom. With careful fingers she gathered my hair and twisted it up while I watched her motions in the mirror. She picked up a pretty cherry blossom hair comb and slipped it into my hair, securing it back. How's that? It looks like a French twist. I loved it. She must have heard the delight in my voice because her face lit up in a wide smile. It's perfect, thank you. A few curls escaped to frame my face and she twisted them up with her fingers before stepping back to look me over. You're stunning. And you're also interested in Nick. It's obvious. She sounded like she'd found out some deep dark secret of mine. I raised my finger in the air. Don't you dare say. I'm going to say it. She laughed. Because you know it's true. Michelle, don't. I told you so. The words burst out of her and I gave her a playful glare in the mirror as she said, You like him. Just admit it. I'm not ready for a relationship, but I have been thinking about Nick nonstop since we met. I try not to, but I can't help it. Tears welled in my eyes and I blinked them back, shaking my head at the sudden wave of emotion. When Kyle cheated on me, I thought I'd never be interested in a man again. Then I dated What's His Name from Charlie Rockwell's Wedding. What was his name? Michelle asked. I shrugged. Everything about him was so forgettable. I mean, he was nice enough. But there was no spark, no chemistry. Chemistry is important. She nodded, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. And you have that with Nick. I saw it. Except he's not into me. She looked stunned. What gives you that idea? I lifted both shoulders helplessly. All he does is talk business. How we could help each other out. How we should work together. How he wants me to model for him. Excuses to talk to you, Michelle said. No, a man like Nick is direct. He would say if he was interested in me, I said, and yet there was some spark between us. Even Michelle seemed sure she'd seen it. You know what? I said, an idea striking me. I'm going to add him on social media. I picked up my phone and searched him out. Before I could change my mind, I sent him a friend request. There, that's not something a business associate would do, right? We'll see if he accepts and then I'll know. You go, girl. Michelle pounded her fist into the air like a cheerleader and then went back into my room and settled back onto the comforter with her melting ice cream. I didn't have to wait long for Nick's response. Within a few moments, a notification blipped on my phone. It's him! Nick? Yes. He accepted my friend request and also sent me a message. Well, don't keep me in suspense. What does it say? With shaking fingers, I tapped my cell screen and waited for the message to load. It says, good idea to team up here, too. Are you kidding me? She asked. My shoulders slumped and I groaned, nibbling my lip before remembering I had lipstick on. I repaired the smudge quickly with a fingertip and reapplied the color. See? I said, checking my teeth to make sure I didn't have lipstick on them. Nothing. The man is all business. Ouch. Ouch indeed, I said, knowing Michelle had it right. I was interested in a potential relationship with him. The spark between us was undeniable. But maybe my interest was simply self-preservation. Maybe wanting a guy who I knew wasn't interested felt safe. Or maybe I was so interested because I hadn't been out in a while. Yes, that must be it. At least, that's what I planned to try to convince myself. Chapter 5. He's here! Michelle's voice rang out, sounding like a call to arms. Okay. I called back, feeling panic spike my blood pressure as I checked myself one last time in the mirror. Nick was here to take me to the opera. It was just a friendly business date and I needed to remember that and stay calm. So, I took a deep breath before leaving my room. Waving to Michelle as I came through the living room, I strode to the front of my penthouse and pulled the door open. Fancy meeting you here, Nick said, the corners of his mouth curving upward as he stood in front of me, looking handsome in his charcoal suit and deep navy button-down shirt. The look in his eyes made my heart skip. His masculine, rich cologne tickled my nose. Maybe I planned to meet you here at this very time, I said, looking him up and down. Wow. My friendly business date looked hot. His eyes narrowed a bit, heat flaring in them. You look beautiful, Missy. Thank you. You look dashing yourself, I said, noting his tailor-made suit fit him perfectly. His hair was combed back and he smelled delicious, like sage and cinnamon. Shall we? He offered me his hand and I took it, the feeling of his warm skin against mine sending tingles skittering up my arm. We shall, I said, giving him a little half-twirl and a slight curve of my lips. Beautiful, he repeated, the husky growl in his voice making my heart flutter. He didn't sound like he was giving the compliment out of obligation. His tone told me he was saying it because he meant it. Thank you, Nick, I said, my belly swirling. I pulled the door closed, stepped forward, and then heard the door open again behind me. Michelle handed me my purse as I realized I'd forgotten my clutch. Oops. I nodded to her and took it with a smile as she slowly closed the door inch by inch. Hello, Michelle. Nick chuckled. Hi, she said, giving him a brilliant smile. Sorry, I was trying to be inconspicuous, not rude or ignoring you. Enjoy your date, you too. With that, she slipped back inside the condo and Nick gave me a sleepy smile. She's a good friend. I tucked my clutch between my ribs and my arm, relieved she'd caught me before I left, so I had my cell phone, lipstick, and evening wallet. He nodded. Ready? Yes. I moved down the hall toward the elevator with him at my side. With every step, tension settled into my bones as I braced for his topic of discussion. When was he going to start asking me about work? I joked that there was always intermission to talk, but I knew the real reason he'd asked me out, for yet another opportunity to try to talk me into working with him. Thank you for this. I glanced up at him, tracing the strong, handsome lines of his face. For taking me out, I mean. It's been a while since I've gone out and the last guy wasn't well, he just wasn't. So, this is nice, you know? This is definitely nice, he said, holding his arm out as the elevator arrived in a gesture for me to go in before him. I don't normally talk too much. I'm sorry. I stepped forward and took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves I felt in every cell of my body, which was so weird. I didn't want a real date. So why was I annoyed that Nick only wanted to meet me for business purposes? I like listening to you. He smiled down at me as he followed me into the elevator. We both reached for the lobby button and our fingers brushed. I jerked my hand back, stunned by the warm jolt of contact, and gave him a flustered smile. Tell me something about you, he said, his rich voice flowing over me like butter. I blinked. He wanted me to talk about myself? In a non-business way? I wasn't sure how to take that. What would you like to know? I asked, turning to him as the elevator doors closed. He lifted my hand, looking at it, before meeting my eyes. Why the opera? My love of the opera stems from a visit to Milan. I went to the opera at La Scala. Italy is beautiful and easily my favorite travel destination. I could close my eyes and remember everything about Italy, the warm scent of clay in the sun, endless vineyards, and the kind of countryside that didn't exist elsewhere in the world. It's a truly magical place. Is that so? His dark eyes flashed as the elevator doors slid open. We stepped into the lobby and began to cross the marble floors toward the front doors. I'm from Milan. I gasped. That's fantastic. I'll bet you love it as much as I do. He nodded as the doorman opened the glass door for us. I nodded to him as Nick guided me toward his car, an expensive top-of-the-line sedan that waited at the curb. He opened the passenger side door for me. I tucked my clutch under my arm again, sat down, and gathered up my skirt so it wouldn't get closed in the door. Then I gave him a nod to indicate I was clear and he closed the door. I watched him walk around the front of the car with long strides. The scent of new car hit my nose along with a hint of Nick's cologne that hung in the air. Intoxicating. When he opened the driver's side door, I smiled over at him. You have exquisite taste in everything, don't you? I asked, referring to his car this time. I like to be comfortable, he said. Judging by your penthouse, I guess the same could be said of you. Touché, Nick. Touché, I said, noting that talking to Nick felt as natural as breathing. He started the car and pulled onto the street in a swift move that told me he was used to driving fast, much like Italian drivers in Italy. Were you in Milan for business or pleasure? For work. That was back in my modeling days, I said, deciding to open up a bit more. Do you want to know why I quit modeling? Yes, that way I can talk you into one last hurrah with my clothing line. You're relentless. I couldn't help but laugh at his persistence this time, even as a little disappointment nagged at me. Tell me, Missy. I want to know why you gave up the glamorous life, he said, telling me that he really wanted to know. I love the lights, the outfits, and the wonderful people I met, I said, thinking of all the parties and good times. But I just got burned out, you know? He nodded as he zipped through the city streets, but I knew his attention was on me. If you loved all of that, maybe the burnout had more to do with other aspects of the job. His hands shifted to 10 and 2 on the wheel and I smiled at his profile. A responsible driver. I liked that. The bottom line is I didn't want to do it anymore, so I quit. It sounds crazy, especially since I have so many followers on social media and my career was still going strong. But somehow, I just had enough, you know? He nodded. Traveling can be tough to take. Exactly, I said, feeling like he listened and understood. All those flights and all the hotel rooms were first class. I know how lucky I was to have those kinds of opportunities. And believe me, I worked hard. But at some point, it was like I'd crossed a line without even knowing there was a line in sight. He stopped at a red light and glanced over at me, a kind smile in his eyes. Sounds like you were tired of traveling more than modeling. Maybe you were ready to settle down. I blew out a breath. Don't I know it? I tried to settle down. I even got engaged. He stiffened a bit behind the wheel, a line forming between his eyebrows relaxed. Then the light went green and he pulled out into the intersection. His aggressive driving didn't scare me one bit. I kind of liked the authoritative way he owned the road. What happened? We split up right before the wedding after I found out that he was cheating on me with my maid of honor, I said, the story seeming to almost belong to someone else a lifetime ago. Now, all I felt was an empty trust chest that I felt would never be filled. Nick's hand left the wheel and he laced his fingers through mine. The contact soothed something inside me and I liked the feel of our clasped hands. Real men don't cheat. He gave my hand a reassuring squeeze before putting it back on the wheel. Then he found a parking spot along the street near the Sacramento Memorial Auditorium, a historic landmark. Nick pulled along the curb, parallel parking perfectly on the first try. A moment later he was out and at my door, opening it for me and offering his hand. I took it and stood, my heart beating a bit too fast. He still hadn't said anything about our potential business collaboration. I braced myself for the topic to come up as we went inside. Instead, Nick commented on the interior of the auditorium and how it combined the historical integrity with modern amenities. We found our seats and I began to relax when the opera started. Near tears at intermission, I stared at the stage through blurry vision. Nick turned to me, his expression warm. It's intermission, Bella. I blinked, realizing the lights had come up and, wait, had he just called me Bella? I'd been to Italy many times and knew that meant beautiful. My heart thundered in my chest at the easy term of endearment. I should go powder my nose, I said, wanting to check my eyes for mascara smudges after the emotional production thus far. We stood up and moved toward the lobby, but a woman's voice stopped us dead in our tracks. Nick, she said. I turned to see a perky blonde widen her eyes as if she were happy yet surprised to see my Nick here. To see Nick here. Just Nick. Not mine at all. Not even close. Melanie? Nick opened his arms and gave her a hug. A stab of jealousy hit me, but I shoved it away. After all, I had no right to be jealous. Melanie let Nick go quickly and tugged on the hand of her date, which I hadn't noticed she was holding. The man stepped forward, offering Nick his other hand. The men shook hands and I felt a little confused, wondering how he knew these people. This is Matt, Melanie said, smiling at Nick. Her eyes shifted to me and then she glanced back at Nick, who put a hand on the small of my back nudging me forward. I braced myself for the inevitable, that Nick was going to introduce me as his prospective business partner. Of course he'd tell them the truth that he'd invited me for work purposes, so why did the thought bother me so much? Mel, this is Missy. Missy, this is Melanie. She used to be an aerobics instructor at Totally Fit, but she moved into a different kind of teaching. Nick smiled warmly down at me and I nodded, offering Melanie my hand. To my surprise, she pulled me into a hug. Super nice to meet you, she said, sounding warm and bubbly. She let me go, smiling up at Matt and speaking to both of us. He's not kidding about my career change. I went from teaching adults aerobics to teaching kids in grade school. My fiancé Matt is a philosophy professor at California State University. Philosophy? I asked, intrigued. My favorite philosophical study is Plato's allegory of the cave. Matt nodded, his kind eyes lighting up. Ah, Plato is an amazing study as well as his teacher Socrates. I nodded, agreeing fully. And if you're going to add Socrates, then Aristotle is a must as well. She's a keeper. Matt put a hand to his chest and turned to Nick as if the statement were a foregone conclusion. I glanced up at Nick and noticed he was watching me very closely. What? I asked, suddenly breathless. You never cease to amaze me. His murmured words sent a rush of heat to my belly and an army of goosebumps skittering up and down my arms. Thank you. Now I must hurry off and find the ladies' room. A pleasure to meet you, Matt and Melanie. I gave an apologetic smile and walked toward the restroom, my head spinning and my heart thumping. In front of the mirrors, I checked my makeup and found it still looking fresh, so I took a moment to gather myself. I'd never had a man affect me in this way. My ex hadn't even come close, and we'd been engaged, which was crazy when I thought about it now. We looked good together and enjoyed some of the finer things, but the connection hadn't been there. Reflecting back, it had been more of a looks good on paper relationship until he, was unfaithful. Quite the opposite, everything Nick said and did seemed as if he could see right through me and there was no hiding allowed. Hearing Nick's words again in my mind, I closed my eyes and remembered the look on his face when he'd said I never ceased to amaze him. It might be the nicest compliment I'd ever received and the most intense. I left the room and headed for our seats, not wanting to be late for the next act. I found Nick and settled next to him, waiting and excited. His hand slipped into mine and something clicked as if everything in my life fell into place with that one gesture. I enjoyed the music and the singing, but my mind kept slipping back to Nick's expression and his mouth murmuring, "You never cease to amaze me." Every time the words repeated in my mind, my face warmed right up to my ears and a shiver tickled down my spine. When the lights finally came up for the last time, we stood up and clapped. As people filed out, we fell into step, shuffling for the doors. This date was lovely, thank you. I looked up at him with a smile. It hit me then that we'd never talked work and every muscle in my body tightened up. Now would be the time. While he took me home. It was his last chance, so of course it would be now. We never did chat about work. He grinned at me, a boyish charm lighting his face even though his words threw little darts at my heart. I'm glad you called it a date, though, because I also enjoyed myself and your company immensely. Thank you for joining me tonight. You're welcome, I said, my heart quickening in my chest as we stepped into the cool night air, feeling like I'd had the most fulfilling date of my life. Chapter 6. The feeling of fresh new satin under my fingertips sent a jolt of pure joy flowing through my veins. In about 30 minutes I'd be closing up shop for the day. It had been a steady flow of people since opening and I felt exhausted. Still, I'd had a new shipment come in, which made me super giddy. I'd work on unloading and making sure my color coordination game was flawless. As the sun started working its way toward the horizon, I lost myself in soft and smooth fabrics, and time began to slip away. I'd have this new shipment ready to go before I left for the night. I'd make sure of that. There was nothing worse than arriving to work on a brand new day with yesterday's work unfinished. With my box of hangers, I began to hang up the new satin tops. Some were a delicate shade of lilac, some were a rosebud pink, and still others were a pale mauve. Perfect, beautiful, delicate. Exactly what the season called for. The soft chime of the entrance door jolted me, and I glanced up. A smile crossed my lips as Nick walked up to me, a coffee cup in each hand. He stopped before me, offering the coffee with a slight nod. Non-fat latte, 1 pump sugar-free vanilla with a sprinkle of cinnamon. You remembered. I took the warm cup, heat flowering in my belly and spreading outward through me at an astonishing rate. Of course I did. It's important to you, so it's important to me. I blinked while he scanned the boxes. Staying late to work tonight? He asked, his attention jumping back to me. I nodded, warmth flooding my cheeks. I needed to stop thinking of how he'd held my hand at the opera yesterday. It didn't mean anything, obviously, since he hadn't even kissed me goodnight. Beyond not kissing me, he'd also acted odd. But he'd showed up here with my favorite coffee, so I was confused, to put it mildly. Yep. Why put off until tomorrow what you can do today? I never saw a point in putting things off. If I left tasks to sit until the next day, they would nag at me all night, mess with my head and stop me from sleeping. So, for the sake of sanity and a good night's sleep, it made sense to get everything done. Good work ethic, he said. I'm the same way. Can't sleep if there's work to be done. More and more, I think you're a kindred spirit, I blurted, my hands freezing over the stack of blouses I'd pulled out of the box as my cheeks heated. I looked up at him, but he was studying something at the back of the store before his gaze swept back to meet mine. What? Nothing, he said, simply. Nothing? He'd literally just said out loud what I'd been thinking, and I called him a kindred spirit, and his response is, nothing. He moved across from me and stopped, placing his coffee on a shelf next to him and opening up the next box. You love this shop, don't you? Yes. I nodded and began to thread the blouses onto the hangers, trying to push aside my confusion at his not responding to my blurted admission. I ran my fingers over the smooth silk blouse material, lost in the beauty of the shirt. I love pretty clothing. Looking my best helps me feel good. That probably sounds silly. Not at all. He shook his head, his dark eyes locking on mine. I get the same feeling working out. Though I do enjoy dressing nicely. I absolutely understand what you mean. I agree with you. Kindred spirits, right? A shiver rolled through me and then I nodded, a tiny smile crossing my lips. I've been thinking about your suggestion. I do think that we could combine our mottos to great effect to help people look and feel their best. He began to fold the stack of pants he'd opened. I watched him a moment, surprised he seemed to remember how I'd taught him to fold them. His attention to detail mirrored my own, and every single fold in the fabric seemed precise and perfect. You learn fast. Rapt attention is what my teacher deserves, he said, giving me a simmering look with those brown eyes. Missy, you'd be the perfect model for my gym wear. Not pressuring you, just saying I think the way you carry yourself and how you really care about your appearance and health would really show through and make the product shine. The compliment made my heart stumble in my chest. I stared at him, every bit of me warming over. Well, you have good ideas, but I'm undecided on working with you. I smiled and shrugged, watching as he chuckled. Well, that's not a no. He opened the next box and I realized he'd folded the entire box of pants already. I moved a bit faster, hanging up the blouses. He'd already unpacked an entire box while I still hadn't finished one. I took a sip of my coffee, praying the caffeine would help get my head back on track. As we worked in silence, I remembered that when he'd walked me to my door last night, I'd been hoping he'd kiss me. Well, to be honest, I'd had a nervous ball in the pit of my stomach and I'd wanted to squirm with excitement and anticipation. But he'd merely touched my cheek, told me he'd enjoyed himself, and left me standing there, alone, watching him walk down the hall. And I'd watched him go, my heart aching in my chest because I'd thought things had gone well. We hadn't discussed work once, he'd called it a date, and the evening had seemed perfect. But no kiss. Was he gay? No, the simmering way he looked at me told me that wasn't the issue. So, what then? The box he opened popped as he broke through the last bit of tape and I gasped, rushing to his side. The beautiful fabric and off-the-shoulder fashion had been a bit risque for my taste, but I needed to try it out. It would be perfect for someone with Michelle's build, if I could ever tear her away from her laptop and get her down here to let me dress her up. Together, we dug in and began to fold up the cute tops, but I changed the full pattern to display the off-the-shoulder style better. He tried to mirror me, but missed a step and I nudged him with my hip and laughed. And here I thought you'd gotten the hang of folding. You changed the rules. I feel betrayed. He grinned down at me, and then held up one of the shirts to his chest. This would look amazing on you. I loved it when I picked it up at the fashion show, I said, amazed that he'd selected my favorite. I held the shirt up to my frame and adjusted one sleeve to be off the shoulder while curving the other sleeve up to rest perfectly on the soft curve between my neck and shoulder. I turned to glance at my reflection in the three-way mirror. I opened my mouth to tell him it wasn't my style after all, but stopped short when I noticed the intense look in his eyes. I turned to face him, my lips parting in shock at the sudden heat in his expression. I knew that look, that pure, undiluted desire. I felt it, too. Suddenly, he came to me. He brushed his knuckles across my cheek and then wove his fingers through the hair above my ear, holding me gently. He leaned forward and paused, his mouth only inches away as his eyes searched mine. My belly did a cartwheel as I waited. Finally, he pressed his lips to mine. My heart thundered in my chest at the feel of his lips brushing mine. Somewhere in my head a siren blared and every brain cell chanted warning, warning, warning. He hadn't kissed me last night, but now he was making up for it all right. And I couldn't help thinking this has been worth the wait. His lips caressed mine once, twice, 3 times, making fireworks explode in my belly. His fingers combed through my hair, sending a shiver down my spine before his hands settled on my shoulders and moved down my back to pull me closer. His lips moved against mine in tiny degrees of claiming that stole the breath out of my lungs. I'd never been kissed quite like this, so efficiently and completely. My legs seemed to be liquefying as the seconds passed. I slipped my arms up around his shoulders just to keep me from falling at his feet. His scent filled my lungs as our mouths explored. His taste was tangy coffee and fiery cinnamon, filling my senses. The sensation of his lips melting with mine in each thorough and searching kiss blew through every last defense I had. I didn't want to get hurt again. But how could he kiss me like this and hurt me? It didn't seem possible. The kiss had been worth the wait, but oh my, I was in trouble. I knew it. This was kiss number 1 and I was already falling, hard. The sound of the door chime jolted me out of his arms and I quickly gave my head a shake to clear it as I straightened up my hair. My gaze darted to the front door as a customer stepped over the threshold. "May I help you?" I asked, taking a deep breath and walking away from Nick, which took every ounce of strength that I had. Wow. Chapter 7. The next morning, I arrived at Totally Fit bright and early to get my workout in before heading to Fashionably late. I'd stopped by Courtney's coffee cart for my beverage of choice, and she confirmed Nick hadn't been by for his espresso yet. Bingo. Fabulous excuse to say hi to him and let him know what I'd decided last night. I was ready to cross-promote with his business. I mean, it made sense business-wise, and I shouldn't turn down a good opportunity just because I had one fabulous date with Nick and some very unforgettable kisses. I was a professional woman who could separate business from my personal life. And if things didn't work out between us? V.A. Bainey. At least, that's what I told myself. Holding Nick's espresso cup in one hand, I greeted the receptionist as I came into the lobby of Totally Fit and waved my gym card over the scanner. The strong scent of cleaner tickled my nose as I headed down the hall toward Nick's office and knocked on the door. "Come in," he called. I opened the door and found him seated at his desk. He lifted his head and his gaze met mine. A warm smile crossed his handsome face as I stepped up to his desk, and then he stood. "Missy? What are you doing here?" "Getting my morning workout in. Plus, I brought you an espresso. Just the way Courtney says you like it." I held out his cup and he took it, his fingertips brushing mine. An electric tingle shot up my arm and my heart rate kicked up. He glanced at our fingers, making me wonder if he'd felt the connection, too. Then he lifted his gaze again. What a thoughtful surprise. "Thank you." "You're welcome," I said, sure more than ever that working with Nick was the right decision. Now I just had to tell him. "Would you like to sit down?" He gestured at the leather chair in front of his desk. "Sure, thanks." I settled into it, holding my coffee drink in my suddenly shaky hand. I was more than a little excited at the thought of seeing Nick more often due to our business venture. Now I just had to tell him. I started to open my mouth. "I'm glad you're here. I've been thinking about you." My belly did a little flip. "You have?" He nodded. "I'd love to hear the story behind Fashionably Late." "Oh, a work question." "Well, it figured." That's more of a third date revelation." A grin crossed his handsome face. "Is that your clever way of telling me you'd like me to take you out again?" He sat back down behind his desk, picked up a stack of papers, pulled off the paper clips and set the papers in a box next to the shredder. "I guess I wasn't that subtle, huh?" I picked up part of the stack and began to pull off paper clips and put them in the pile he'd made while setting aside the papers to be shredded. "How are you not digital? Behind the times, right?" He chuckled, his eyes meeting mine. "I just made the switch. That's why I'm getting these ready to be shredded." "Oh." I took a breath, readying myself to tell him the real reason I'd come. "I have something for you," he said. "Something for me?" What did he mean? I dropped a paperclip on the pile and watched him pick up a little bowl and scoop all the paperclips into it. "Is it a bowl of paperclips?" I asked. He laughed. "No, it's a gift." He stood and moved toward the wall while I continued separating the paperclips from the stacks of paper. He picked up an enormous rectangular sign and turned it around. "For Fashionably Late," he said. I gasped, the papers slipping from my fingers. The words "Fashionably Late" were scrawled beautifully across the long white sign, and the text colors were a watercolor splash of pinks, mauves, super soft amethyst and lilac. It was beautiful. "You had this made for me?" I did. His warm eyes crinkled at the corners and I set my coffee on his desk, stood up and threw my arms around his shoulders. I thought it would fit well above the front door. "I love it. I've been trying to figure out what to put there." It was true that I'd been struggling to fill the blank space. I let him go and stared down at the canvas. It was perfect. Touched by this totally out-of-the-blue gesture, I blinked back tears. I'd never expected a considerate gift like this from him, and my heart ached under the pressure of the emotion. This is the sweetest thing anyone's ever done for me. He gave me a side glance. Well, I don't know about that. I do. You're very sweet, I said, thinking that in all the time I'd dated Kyle he'd never even come up with anything unique to give me as a gift. Not even for important occasions like birthdays and holidays. He'd opt for shiny gifts, which I liked. But this was so personal and perfect. I needed it, but I hadn't even known I needed it. He nodded at the sign. I agonized between that and some art. I love modern, bold art, but I think I love this more. I glanced at the sign again, marveling at how he said he'd agonized over the decision. You're amazing, you know that? I asked. I meant it, too. He wasn't talking work or asking me to model for him right now either. He'd done something sweet just for me and wasn't even trying to leverage it to pressure me into working with him. You don't need to butter me up, I teased. Humor sparkled in his eyes. I wouldn't dream of it. I don't even like butter. I giggled. Thank you for this. I really love it. You're welcome. He sat back down behind his desk and gathered up a stack of papers and shifted them to the shredder box. I can't wait to hang it up and see the sign in its new home. I sat in the comfortable leather chair, not taking my eyes off the breathtaking sign. Then I remembered what I'd set out to do today. He kept sidetracking me by telling me he was thinking about me, asking me questions and giving me a gift. I glanced at him. I'm excited. If you'd like, I could help you hang it, he said. I'd like that, I said, as an image of him on a ladder hanging the sign perfectly above the door popped into my head. I sighed, loving that he didn't make the offer sound like I needed his help. He was just offering to help, which made the gesture even sweeter. But I was getting sidetracked again, which was becoming a habit around Nick. I picked up a stray paperclip and dropped it in the bowl. Speaking of 2 more dates. The corner of his mouth hitched up. Were we? We were. I rubbed my thumb over the logo on the coffee cup, trying to still the trembling in my hands. I took another sip of coffee and then set it down. You know, I've always been against dating coworkers. I don't understand. He crossed his arms, leaned back in his chair, and his eyebrows came together as he studied me. You and I are not coworkers. I'll wait for you to get there. My light teasing tone softened the words. My fingers played with the stack of papers, tugging a paperclip free. He set the box on the desk and I put the papers to be shredded into it. The paperclip clattered in the little bowl. We work well together, I said, nodding at the half-depleted stack. His eyebrows shot upward as the realization seemed to hit him. You want to cross-promote with me? He stood, looking at me like he didn't quite believe it. I stood and nodded. I really do. Excellent. He came around the desk and lifted me in the air, twirling me around. I giggled, staring up into his warm eyes. I'm excited, too. When he pulled back, his gaze drifted down to my mouth. I licked my bottom lip, wishing he would kiss me and wondering if I should kiss him. Decisions. And then, I went up on my tippy toes and our lips met, in a soft kiss that was sweet and perfect. I'm sorry, he said, pulling away as he set me down and turned his back to me. What's wrong? I stepped closer to him and touched his shoulder. Nick? He turned to face me. Nothing is wrong. What were you apologizing for? I asked, tilting my head in confusion. Aren't you happy we'll be working together? I am, he said, but his smile still wasn't quite right. I opened my mouth to say something more just as the phone on his desk trilled. He glanced at the phone. I should get that. Okay, I said, confused by the way he was acting. Whatever. I didn't need to stick around for this cold treatment, especially when I'd finally agreed to work with him after all his prodding. I picked up my coffee as he answered the phone, sounding as polite as ever. Was there something wrong with me kissing him? Was he really just acting sweet to get me to work with him? And now that I'd agreed, were we just to be business partners? If so, then that was fine. I didn't need this hot and cold treatment anyway. Bye, Nick. He waved and nodded. See you later. I stepped out the door, every bit of me wanting to turn around and demand answers. I wanted to know what went wrong. No, I needed to know. I hesitated outside the door, turning around so I could go back in when I overheard his words and my blood ran cold. Are you free tonight? We should go out and celebrate. He stared at the phone, not even seeming to notice I was still in the doorway. He had to be talking to a guy friend, right? A good friend. Not a woman. Nick wasn't that kind of guy. After all, he'd said real men don't cheat. On the other end of the call, I clearly heard a woman's voice come through. That sounds wonderful, Nick. Every nerve in my body froze. I didn't know what was going on, but the one thing I did know is that I wasn't going to stick around to find out. Chapter 8. On Monday afternoon, I stood in front of a building that seemed to be all windows, waiting for Nick. He asked me to meet him at this address, which I didn't recognize. But I figured business was business and I promised myself to keep things professional. I didn't want to talk about what happened the last time we saw each other or the strange way things had ended between us in his office. What did it matter anyway? I'd had fun spending time with him socially, but I didn't want a relationship, so it was better if that aspect between us was over. I tried to pretend I didn't care, even as my stomach knotted when I saw Nick coming up the sidewalk, carrying a bag. I'm glad you could meet me. He approached, giving me a kiss on both cheeks, before placing his hands on my shoulders and studying me. You look beautiful. Thanks, I said, smoothing a hand over my silk blouse, deciding to just take the compliment as a polite gesture. I smiled up at him. You're looking handsome. Thank you. He dipped his head and stopped with his hand on the doorknob. Are you ready? I have no idea what we're doing, but we're here, so, yes. He chuckled. I guess there's no reason to keep it a secret anymore. We're here for a private art showing. You mentioned a love of bold, modern art. Yes, I said, tilting my head. Part of me was touched that he'd listened and remembered my preference, but what did that have to do with cross-promoting our businesses? Let's go inside, he said. All right, I said, more perplexed than ever. For a man who was usually quite direct, I had no idea where I stood with him. I told myself that didn't matter. We walked inside and were met by a grinning, flamboyant woman with short, bright blue hair and blue eyes with heavy, winged liner. She clasped both hands together and then dropped them at her sides. Her cropped shirt showed off the sparkling belly button ring. You must be Nick and Missy. Beautiful ring, I said, because it was true. I'd let my belly button piercing close up, but her sparkle made me reevaluate. Fashion definitely extended to jewelry. Thank you. Her bright voice made me smile. You were expecting us? I asked. She glanced at Nick, then her grin widened. Of course. Nick called in a favor for us too. It's a secret, he said, holding up both hands and waving them at her. Then he winked at her and she laughed. Why don't you wander around first? Then we'll get to the other part. She offered her hand. I'm Kara, by the way. Nice to meet you. I shook her hand and then began to wander around the large room, which appeared to be an art gallery, even though I hadn't noticed a name on the door. The art pieces hung strategically on the walls held bold, bright colors with a modern twist of shapes that was both fresh and exciting. This is a neat space, I said. He glanced down at me with a smile. I'm glad you like it. This is Kara's studio and she works by appointment only. Or, so I'm told. We stopped before a painting that sucked the breath right out of my lungs. I approached it, drinking in every detail of the beautiful row of trees in the countryside, which had been painted with thick, bold brushstrokes and vivid colors. If I unfocused my eyes just a tiny bit, it reminded me of the countryside of Milan. Thick black brush marks made birds and the sky came to life with lilac, sunset pink, pale creme, purple and gray. I love this one, I said, gesturing to the painting. Me, too, he said, and then his hand slipped around mine. What the? I glanced down at our joined hands, wondering what was going on with these mixed messages he was giving me. I knew I should pull my hand away to keep things clear and professional between us, but the truth was I didn't exactly hate the feel of his hand around mine. How about this one? He asked. Wow. I looked at the painting and wanted to touch it, but I knew better than to put the oils of my fingertips on the canvas. Instead, I studied the painting closely. It resembled the streets of Milan as if painted by someone looking at a colorful reflection of the streets from puddles after a heavy rain. Vibrant cobalt, sunflower yellow, and pumpkin orange made up the rippled effect of two people under an umbrella walking away from the viewer. This looks like Milan. I agree. These are beautiful. I breathed the words, tearing my attention from the paintings long enough to glance over at him. Nick? Kara asked, appearing beside us. We both turned to face her as she said, everything is ready. What are you up to? I asked. His lips twitched. It's a secret. You are full of mystery, I said, liking this part of his personality in some ways but not loving it so much in other ways. Would you like to know the surprise? He asked. Yes, I said, without hesitation. Kara nodded. Okay, then. Right over here. With that, she led us to the center of the room. I hadn't even noticed the table there, or the wine, the wooded board of cheeses, crackers, and grapes, or the single candle with its soft flame. Please sit down and enjoy yourselves. I'll be right back. She turned and walked off as Nick pulled out my chair for me. Thank you, sir, I said. My pleasure. He nodded and then sat beside me at the table. Wine? Yes, please. This was such a strange setup and I needed answers. Why are we the only ones here? Most galleries are open to crowds. I called in a favor for a private showing. I nodded. He'd said that already. But why? So I can have you all to myself, he said, flashing a charming grin as he popped the cork on the wine. I shook my head. What makes you think I like surprises? Do you? Sometimes, I admitted. As I thought. He poured the wine into two stemless glasses and offered me one. Okay, then. We're here for a private showing, but just wandering around looking at art, well, that's not enough for you. Therefore, I got permission for us to actually do some hands-on work. Hands-on. Surely he didn't mean we'd be painting. You were right, that painting was of Milan. Most of these are in Italian settings because the painter is from Italy. He took a sip of wine and studied me. So the painter is going to give us a chance to create our own bold paintings. Then we take them home with us. Wow, I said, impressed at the plan he'd laid out. Score points for creativity. I really loved the idea, though I had a few misgivings. I don't know how to paint, Nick. He leaned toward me. Neither do I. That's the fun of it. Will it be fun when I paint a stick figure? I took a sip of my wine and watched the corner of his mouth hitch up. A woman who has traveled the world like you have done enjoys a little adventure. Am I wrong? Not completely. I smiled, starting to relax and enjoy being here with Nick. But what if you're the next Michelangelo and my art looks like a baby's finger painting? Then we'll switch when Kara returns and I'll say you're an amazing artist and should try sculpting. We'll go around the world, showing your art and getting rich and famous. I'll be your manager. Deal? He asked, his grin flashing. Deal. I laughed aloud as Kara walked up to our table. Here are the paints, aprons, and other things you'll need. She smiled at us as she set everything on the table. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm not a world-famous painter, but I dabble enough to know my way around an art set. Thank you, Kara. Nick set a canvas in front of me and placed one in front of him, before pulling out a box of what looked like paints. Paolo, the painter, apologized for not being here as something personal came up, but he'd love to talk with you later. She laced her fingers together. Just yell if you need me. I watched her depart and then glanced at Nick. He took one of the aprons and handed it to me, and then took the other and began to put it over his nice suit. This is high fashion, I said, holding up the crisp, white apron. Do I look fabulous? He struck a pose and I laughed. Yes, you do. I adjusted my apron, grateful I wouldn't ruin my blouse or pants tonight. Now the basics. He shuffled through some paintbrushes, and then just upended them onto the table between us. Here's the paint, the brushes, and you have your canvas. What are you going to paint? I picked up a fluffy brush that reminded me of something I'd used to apply blusher to my cheeks. No idea. You? Oh, don't paint me, he chuckled, holding up his palms. Clever. No, I didn't mean I was going to paint you. I meant, what are you going to paint? I nudged him with my shoulder and he picked up a blue paint tube. A city street reflected in a raindrop. Very ambitious. My eyebrows lifted as I took one of the white palette plates and picked out a few colors called sunset orange, Havana red, and plum purple. I thought you'd never painted before. Not since I was a child. And I'm not counting finger painting. He took a sip of wine and set the glass down in order to put a bit of blue in his palette, along with black and white. That makes two of us. I never liked finger painting. Didn't like to get dirty. I smiled at him as I squeezed the colors I'd chosen onto my palette plate. He nodded, selecting his paintbrush with the precision of a surgeon. Why did things get so weird in your office the other day? I blurted, peeking up at him as I dabbed my brush into the sunset paint. He stiffened a bit, took a deep breath and then relaxed, giving me an embarrassed look. I'm sorry about that, Missy. I'm just stunned by the feelings I have for you. My belly did a massive flip. Really? Positively. Huh, I said, oh so lamely. That wasn't what I'd expected him to say. I swallowed hard, raking my mind for the next thing to say, but I couldn't keep a smile off my lips. He had feelings for me. Feelings that stunned him. I lifted my lashes and blinked at him. That doesn't sound like a bad thing. No, it's not a bad thing. Surprising, yes. Bad, no. Well, there you have it. I took a sip of wine, picked up my paintbrush, and began to make long strokes over my canvas with the bold orange. While I painted, Nick put some cheese on crackers and set them on a wooden board for me along with a bunch of grapes. For you, he said. Thank you, I said, picking up a cracker and popping it into my mouth. The cheese melted instantly on my tongue and I crunched into the cracker. So good. I thought you brought me here for business purposes, I said, watching the candlelight flicker before turning to him. Is this a date, Nick? He took a sip of his wine, eyeing me over the rim with an arched eyebrow. Does it feel like a date? Well, let's see. You invited me here as a surprise. You've got a candle lit, wine, food, activities. I have to conclude that it seems like a date. A wicked twinkle sparkled in his eyes as he studied the canvas in front of him. He hadn't even touched paint to the surface yet. Huh. Well, when you put it that way. This really is amazing. I couldn't wrap my head around how wonderful it all was. Nobody had ever done anything like this for me and I loved it. Well, I think you're amazing. The low tone of his voice made my stomach flip. Thank you. I shook my head, wondering what I was going to do with him. Not like I could hold a grudge for his weirdness when he admitted feelings for me so directly. I popped a grape in my mouth while he began to carefully dab blue on his canvas. So, I was thinking about your look good feel good idea. He chuckled, shaking his head. I set up this date and all you can think about is work? I stared at him, stunned. After all the time he'd spent trying to get me to talk work, now he was chiding me for discussing it? A smile tugged the corners of his lips. You're teasing me, aren't you? I shook my head, took a sip of my wine and focused on my canvas again, this time adding some Havana red with my sunset orange. I'm excited about working with you, Nick. What can I say? His hand covered mine and a tingle of electricity flowed from his fingers up my arm toward my already pounding heart. I'm excited, too. Good, I said, liking that we had things out in the open. So about the look good feel good idea, he reminded me of what I'd been saying as if he were pushing me to continue. His eyes stayed locked on his canvas where the blue began to take on a rounded shape. The shading of white and blue resembled a drop of water. Go on, he said. I liked the thought of offering some kind of push in both of those directions. I used the edge of a cloth to clean up a drop of paint I'd accidentally smudged on the canvas. You send people my way, I give them a discount or free consultation. I send them your way and I give them a free session with a personal trainer. He nodded, taking the words right out of my mouth as he added some white to his drop to create a rather lifelike reflection. Exactly. Cross-promote our businesses, share our reach, and offer something beneficial to our customers. Win, win, and win, he said. You also told me you sell gym clothes. Maybe I could put a little section of your clothing line in my store and see if it interests my customers, I said, even though Michelle had actually thought of that idea. Michelle's suggestion, so she gets credit for that one. That would be great, he said. We worked on our paintings, chatting about work and other things as our creations took form. His water drop turned out beautifully and the reflection of buildings looked familiar. Looking over his shoulder, I said. Your painting is so good. Thank you. He leaned over and I tried to block mine from his sight. So is yours. Well, what I can see of it. It's not. I snorted. My sunset painting of the Grand Canyon looked like someone had dropped a splattering of paint on a canvas and the colors had simply slid down, leaving streaks of color that didn't blend at all. It's awful. I like it, he said. I guffawed. You can't possibly. I wouldn't lie to you, Missy, he said, causing a warm feeling to spread across my chest. And there is one more thing I wanted to give you tonight. I bit my bottom lip. You're going to spoil me. He nodded. That's the idea. I want to spoil you. I'd been joking around, but he seemed serious and my heart fluttered in my chest. Okay. He picked up a gift bag that I remembered he'd been carrying when he arrived at the building. He set it before me and slid it my direction. Inside were a set of beautiful, soft leggings and a workout tank top. It's the totally fit design and logo. It's beautiful, I said, my heart sinking a little since we'd returned to a work topic. I knew it wasn't fair to have this kind of mistrust, but being burned before made me wary. After this perfect date, I realized I wanted more from him. We had an instant connection I'd tried to ignore, but there was no denying my feelings any longer. Thank you, I said. He squeezed my hands. They're a gift. You're supposed to smile. My heavy heart lightened a tiny bit. Just something comfortable for you to wear while you work out, okay? I nodded. Maybe he had no ulterior motives. Maybe I was being completely paranoid, which seemed totally unfair to him. His charming grin flashed and something in me melted. Trust me, they'll be more comfortable than what you usually wear to the gym. I stood up. Thank you for tonight. I had a lovely time. My pleasure, Bella, he whispered, before dropping a light kiss on my lips, making my heart go wild in my chest. With my painting in my hand, I smiled up at him, thinking everything felt so natural with him, almost like we were made for each other. I'd never felt this kind of connection before, and it was definitely time to stop fighting it. So, I kissed him again just to prove to myself that I'd made up my mind to see where things might lead with Nick. Chapter 9. I was pretty sure I was going to pass out on the sidewalk. Why did I let Michelle talk me into going on a morning jog with her? I mean, the sun hadn't even cleared the horizon. The sky may have looked beautiful streaked with pinks and oranges, but all I could focus on was making it through this jog without flopping down on the ground. Clearly, I'd taken too long of a break from serious cardio. Why, oh, why had I done that? Hold on, I said, then stopped and bent down and pretended to check my shoes. They were still tied, but I needed an excuse to take a breather. With my hands planted just above my knees, I sucked in the damp pavement-scented air. The lawn sprinklers in East Sacramento where we'd ended up had only recently shut off and the ground still looked wet. The air still held that faint chill of humidity that cooled my skin. 1 second. Please. I beg of you. You okay? Michelle jogged in place in front of me. Where did she get all this energy so early in the morning before coffee? It was criminal, and if I had more energy, I'd citizens arrest her. We can go home if you want, even though, you know, we've only gone 2 miles. I'm okay. No way I'd give up now. I could handle her usual jogging route. I sucked in a deep breath and nodded. Too much strength training at the gym. I've been neglecting cardio. How many times have you gone in the past 2 weeks? She asked. I've been busy at work. Like I said, we can go back, Michelle said as a guy jogged past us swiftly like he was the Energizer Bunny, his shorts swishing a bit with each tight movement. She tilted her head and watched him go and lowered her voice to a whisper. He was cute. Was he? All I'd seen were his white jogging shoes and the very bottom of his shorts brushing his quads from my bent-over position. Okay, let's go. I forced myself to jog again, even though I was pretty sure my muscles would be yelling at me later. Talk about losing it if you don't use it. Is that the real reason you jog first thing in the morning? I asked. She gave me a confused look. Is what the real reason? So you can check out cute guys? I smiled and kept pace with her while trying not to look completely winded. I could do this. She laughed. Oh, I see what you think of me. We passed by a fenced yard with a dog inside that raced alongside us until we passed his property line. Maybe you should catch up to him. Ask him out, I said, thinking that with any luck she'd let me pass out in peace and I could save face. And leave you without a jogging partner? I'm a better friend than that. She laughed at me and I knew she enjoyed that this was pure torture for me. Yeah, a better friend than that. I teased her and she giggled before I got serious. I heard Nick take a call from a woman in his office. Do you think it means anything? He seems trustworthy and I don't want to put any of my old baggage on him, but I can't help feeling uneasy. Was this before or after your amazing painting date? She asked. Of course I'd told her about the date. Before. Michelle slowed as I stopped and took another breather. What exactly did he say? She asked, turning to face me as she crossed her arms loosely. Walk me through it. Are you free tonight? We should go out and celebrate. Or something like that. I tried to sound nonchalant, but the words were blazed in my memory like they'd never leave. That's pretty specific. Michelle eyed me like she knew I wasn't being entirely honest. Do you really run like this every day? I asked, changing the subject like a coward. I couldn't believe this was part of her daily routine. I could swear we'd run 1,000 miles and we still weren't home. I'm exhausted. She grinned. To be fair, we've only run about half my daily miles. Are you kidding? She shook her head and giggled. Wow. I wanted to push her into the wet lawn behind her, but I wasn't sure I wouldn't fall down, too. And I had no doubt she'd step out of the way and I'd fall face first for the whole neighborhood to see and laugh at. No thanks. Well, we still have the trip back. I'll keep up with you if it's the last thing I do. She laughed. Finish telling me what's bugging you about this call. It's her response over the phone. I peeked over at her as we fell into step jogging back the way we'd come. I struggled not to show that I was, in fact, winded again. I'd grown stronger at Totally Fit, but I'd sure lost a lot of endurance over the last few months. She said that sounds wonderful in a very flirtatious voice. Michelle went quiet and gave me a worried look. That complicates things. Maybe it was his sister? Maybe? I didn't know if he had a sister, but I'd rather think it was a sister than a woman he was dating. The thought of her being a relative made me feel better, but only a tiny bit. What if it wasn't a sister? Or a cousin? I didn't like feeling jealous. It wasn't an emotion I'd overused before being cheated on. My heart just didn't want to risk that kind of hurt again. But maybe not. How do I know who his relatives are? It's not like you to worry like this, she said. We paused at the end of the block, jogging in place, as we looked both ways for cars. The coast was clear, so we hopped off the curb to cross the street. He's just a guy and it's not serious, right? You're right, of course. Nick and I weren't serious. It was supposed to be casual. But it didn't feel casual. I liked him. A lot. I never worried about things like guys I'm dating having female friends. Until Kyle cheated on me, at least. Since then I'd been less sure of myself and more concerned about cheaters. But you know what they say about once burned twice shy. So get out of the kitchen. Not like you can cook. Michelle laughed. Cheap shot. You'd live on ice cream if you could. I teased her. I couldn't stop jogging after picking on her, so I pushed through that breathless feeling and wondered if my heart could, in fact, actually explode from jogging. Mint chocolate chip ice cream, to be exact. Ouch. She pretended to duck like she thought I was going to smack her or something. Of course, I'd never do that. Honestly, I think you shouldn't worry about the call. Without context, it could be anything from him talking to his sister to an old colleague. She was making too much sense. I tried to settle my nerves. You're probably right. You really like this guy, don't you? She asked, slowing as I came to a stop and struggled to catch my breath while pressing a hand to the stitch in my side. I do. It was almost scary how much I liked him. I caught up to Michelle and kept pace with her, regretting every burning step. And that's a problem. A problem? She asked, sounding confused. Yep. I needed to step back from Nick. I liked him. I liked him a lot. It's a little late to only keep things professional with him. She flashed me a troubled look. Wow. You've really fallen hard, Missy. I mean, he seemed to be a nice guy. It's okay to have feelings for him. Whether you want to or not, it sounds like you're already there. I know. That's what scared me. Chapter 10. Striding out of the back room at fashionably late, I waved to Lisa behind the register, thanking my lucky stars that I had her help. Having an extra set of hands to help behind the register made all the difference. Especially when I was dealing with demanding new customers before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Welcome to Fashionably Late. I offered my hand to a fiery redhead, who leveled me with her big green eyes. I'm Missy, the owner. Perfect. I'm Veronica, she said, shaking my hand while the man at her side shifted beside her and dipped his head. I know exactly what I want. This is my brother. I'm Victor. He stepped forward with a heart-stopping grin and offered his hand. She dragged me along. I didn't drag you along. Veronica elbowed him and then planted her hands on her hips. You're thrilled I'm visiting you and happy to be showing me around downtown. Am I right? The corner of his mouth curved upward. Yes, I'm glad to be here, in a women's clothing boutique. Pleasure to meet you. I laughed, noticing the guy was a good sport considering his sister had clearly forced him into shopping with her. I turned to Veronica. You say that you know exactly what you want. That sounds like a great start. Well, as far as style at least. I nodded. We can work with that. What kind of styles are you looking for? Pretty, soft, feminine. She tilted her head. Very classy and chic. Several outfits popped into mind, so I led them toward a rack and showed her a beautiful flowing shirt that would enhance the teal in her eyes. What do you think? She eyed the shirt. Not a fan of that shade of blue. But the style is good. It would look great on you, Victor said. You should get it so we can go. She glared at him and he mimed zipping his lips and tossing away the key. Men don't understand, Veronica said. How about this? I smiled diplomatically and pulled out another top in a similar style but in a plum color that would complement her skin tone and red hair. Let me see. She reached for it and I pressed it into her hands. She sighed, running her fingers over the material. It's so soft. We can add it to the try-on pile. I wanted to be sure she loved it on as well, otherwise the whole point was moot. How do you feel about greens? You. She shook her head. I know redheads are expected to wear green, especially when we have green eyes, but I always feel like Christmas morning in green. She made a face. No thanks. I laughed. I liked her. So where are you visiting from? Seattle. She smiled at me and took the shirt I held out to her. I loved the bold cobalt blue and the overall delicate style of the shirt. It screamed look at me, but in a tasteful way. It's so hot here. I'm not used to it and have nothing to wear. Victor chuckled. I warned her to pack for Sacramento weather, but she never listens to me. I'm just so used to the cold I didn't think the heat would bother me. She elbowed her brother who pretended to be mortally wounded, clutching his ribs and staggering to the side. Ignore him, she said. No problem. I chuckled, even though his good looks would be hard for anyone to ignore. This would go well with the shirt. What do you think? No. I don't like those. She refused the nice set of dress pants I offered. They'd suit several of the shirts we'd chosen, but I moved on. I love the skirt, though. Wonderful. I added the cute white skirt to the mix. The white would help keep her cooler in the sunshine. White reflects the heat, too. So black was a bad choice? She glanced down at the cute little black dress she wore. Why didn't you say something? She asked Victor. How would I know? He lifted both shoulders and then shoved a hand through his short hair with an easy smile. You think I'd give you a reason to drag me into a place like this? What's that supposed to mean? She asked, planting a hand on her hip and staring up at him. His expression dropped. I mean, shopping isn't my thing. I'm sure she's just teasing you. I gave him a smile and watched him light up. We added several more things to the pile. Veronica wasn't kidding when she said she knew what she liked. She shot down several things and accepted a few more. When we had a sizable mound, I turned to her again. Are you ready to try things on? You bet. She followed me as I led the way. Lisa hurried to catch up and smiled at us. We passed by the rack with Nick's athletic line and Veronica made a little noise. Those are really out of place in here. Not nearly as nice as everything else you offer. It's an experiment. I tilted my head, agreeing the athletic line didn't fit in, but I'd made a commitment to try cross-promotion and I was a woman of my word. But the fact that a customer had said my thoughts gave me pause. Lisa leaned in, wrinkling her nose. I've had several other customers say the same thing about the athletic line. Thank you. I nodded as she opened the dressing room door for me. I hung the clothing up on the hooks and stepped back. There you go, I said to Veronica. I'm excited. She smiled at me, and then slipped into the dressing room. Victor sat on one of the nice chairs I had for the husbands and friends outside the dressing area. I'm impressed, he said softly. I moved to his side and sat next to him. You handled her well. Most people think she's annoying and high maintenance. We're all high maintenance when it comes to clothes. That's why I'm here. I smiled at him and he flashed a heart-melting grin at me. Well, you're good at your job. Thank you. I adjusted my top and glanced over at Lisa. She floated around, helping the customers who were browsing the store. It's nice of you to be here for your sister. Somebody's got to put up with her. He chuckled, but I could tell he adored her. I love this. Veronica's happy voice pushed through the door and we both glanced at it. I love everything. It's perfect. I'm taking all of it. You're welcome to wear whatever you like out as well, I said. Due to the heat and all. Missy, you're a lifesaver. She opened the door and stepped out of the room, the cobalt blue top on with the flowing white skirt. With a smile, she gave a little spin. I clapped. Beautiful. Wow. Victor stood up and walked over to his sister. Will you hold this? She asked him, treating him to a smile. Of course. He gathered her things up while she threw her arms around me. I'm glad you've enjoyed your experience. We began to work our way up to the front of the store. Lisa waved from behind the registers. Enjoyed my experience? She grinned widely at me. I wish I could bring you to Seattle. I had a fantastic time. And you, Missy, you are good at this. Thank you. At the register, Lisa rang everything up while Victor stepped closer to me. Lisa and Veronica chatted lightly about Seattle and how she was going to struggle to get her new haul of clothing into her luggage for the plane ride home. Did you need something? I asked Victor. Am I that obvious? His green eyes locked on mine. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me. Without Veronica, of course. Oh. That's so nice and, unexpected, I said, putting a hand to my chest. Sure, he was a good-looking guy, but I was caught off guard since I hadn't even considered dating him. He seemed nice and upbeat, and I'd enjoyed our brief conversations. Unexpected in a good way? He arched an eyebrow at me. Just surprised. I smiled at him. I could say yes. Go out with this guy and get my mind off my troubles for a night. I'd enjoy the casual date. Logically, I should probably go for it, but my heart whispered what about Nick? Plus, nice as he was, I didn't feel a spark with him. At all. Not even half a spark. Thank you for the invite, but I'm going to have to decline. Worth a shot, he said, smiling good-naturedly. I said goodbye to Victor and moved on to help the next customer. Even though I didn't know where I stood with Nick, I knew where I wanted to stand with him. And with Nick, there were sparks galore. In fact, I decided to text him to see if he was free this weekend. I felt giddy at the thought of seeing him again. Chapter 11. This is a beautiful place for a picnic, I said. Instead of a restaurant, Nick had brought me to the edge of the river on a beach I'd never seen before. I stepped onto the sand and flashed him a smile. He followed me onto the sand, his canvas bag slung over one shoulder. What's the name of this place? I asked. I hated that I would wind up messing up the mood on this gorgeous Sunday afternoon, but I needed to let Nick know his clothing line wasn't working in my store. Yes, I needed to find a way to tell him. Oh, this was so going to be awkward. Sand Cove Park. It's a local secret. He put a finger over his mouth. Shoo. It's beautiful. I scanned the beach. Dark, dirty sand stretched along beside the river. I didn't even see anyone else, so he must have been right about it being a local secret. How far does the park go? Not sure. It's a good size for boating, though, since I see them going by periodically. He walked right down toward the water and chose a nice spot partially shaded by a tree that looked like it was reaching for the water with its branches. Are you hungry? Well, yeah, I agreed to lunch, didn't I? I teased. I guess you did. He sat down and opened his bag. From it, he produced a blanket, which he spread out on the sand in the shade. Next he pulled out a bottle of sparkling cider, 2 glasses, and several containers of takeout. Lunch. Sparkling cider? I arched an eyebrow at him. No alcohol on this public beach. It seemed like a good alternative. He lifted both shoulders and I giggled. I didn't mind sparkling cider one bit. What are we eating? I settled down on the blanket and slipped my shoes off. It's a surprise. He chuckled. But the clamshell containers smelled undeniably like barbecue and my mouth began watering like crazy. Smells like barbecue. I paused to smile at a random woman who was walking a beautiful dog. Pretty puppy. Thanks. She grinned at me and kept walking. How did you know? Nick pressed a clamshell into my hands and I opened it to find some incredible-looking barbecue with a side potato salad. Perfection. Lucky guess. I picked up the fork and scanned the beach again. Then I turned to Nick, hoping that he wouldn't take this personally. I'd like to talk to you about your athletic line in Fashionably Late. Oh. Why don't we eat first and talk later? He opened the sparkling cider, poured a cup and handed it to me. I took it with a soft thank you and took a sip while considering his words. I didn't want to wait to talk about the clothing line. Putting things off so did not work with me. I wanted to get the unpleasant conversation out of the way so we could, hopefully, enjoy our afternoon. Is this a reasonable alternative to wine? It's delicious. I've always enjoyed apple cider. I took another sip and listened to the lulling sounds of the river. It's been a long time since I went on a picnic. Really? He took a sip of his cider. It's peaceful out here and you can't beat that view. You're right. I smiled at a couple walking hand in hand along the edge of the water. I wanted something like that. A comfortable relationship with someone where we could enjoy the simple things together like a walk by the river. Thank you for bringing me here. You're welcome. He took a bite of barbecue and I remembered my food. This smells so good. I stabbed a piece of meat slathered in sauce and popped it in my mouth. The sweet and savory flavor had me squeezing my eyes closed. The meat itself disintegrated on my tongue and I groaned my approval. I'm hooked. He chuckled. It's from my favorite barbecue place. Listen, Nick. I'm not sure your athletic line is a good fit for my store. I opened my eyes and glanced at him. He dipped a chunk of meat in the sauce in the clamshell. I'm sorry. It's just been bothering me and I need to tell you how I feel. He met my gaze. The product sells well, though. You're right. Your clothing does sell well in your gym, I said, knowing that at my upscale boutique I'd had more complaints and comments about it than sales. I didn't want to tell him that or hurt his feelings. His clothing line was fantastic. But casual athletic didn't work on my shelves. But how did I tell him the specifics without hurting his feelings? Still. Athena, a woman called, as her dog bounced into the water like a deer. Her owner chased after her. You better not get soaked. Oh, great. Now you're all wet. The dog paused with a wide doggy smile on her face, before she ran up on the beach and shook the water from her short fur. Then she planted both paws and wiggled her backside to get dry. Her owner called out and approached and the puppy took off again. Her owner continued in hot pursuit and I giggled. Remind me not to own a dog. Looks like a lot of work, Nick said, his tone sounding far away. Dogs are cute. But my condo isn't exactly pet-friendly. Still? Nick watched the young woman and dog race off down the beach, his eyes crinkling at the corners, before glancing at me. You were saying. I sighed. Still. I don't want to change your line. I'm just not sure it works for my store. I took a drink of my sparkling cider and set the stemless wine glass in the cool, shaded sand. But I was talking to a dear friend about the, situation, and I may have an idea. Well, that's good. He grinned at me, still enjoying his salad. He seemed a little let down by my earlier statement, but not terribly upset. Did you really mix your barbecue with the salad? I gave his messy food a glance before meeting his innocent stare. No? That would be weird. He glanced side to side, then slowly closed the lid of his clamshell and I laughed. He prepared another bite. It's actually really good. He offered me the bite and I hesitated. You'd better be right. I opened my mouth and he tucked the salad and barbecue mixture between my teeth. The second I bit into it, I decided he had the right idea after all. It was delicious. Sweet and savory, creamy and a tiny bit bitter and juicy, it was heaven in a bite. That may be messy, but it's actually really good. That's why I suggested it to you. He grinned and took another bite, leaning away from me like he thought I'd steal his food from him. Now, about this idea. I was chatting with my friend Claire and she had some suggestions. I closed my food container and set it on the blanket next to me. Grabbing my purse, I pulled it close and reached in for the designs I'd brought with me, while fighting back that bittersweet memory of working with Claire on my wedding dress. The same dress I'd never walked down the aisle in thanks to my cheating ex. Claire is a wedding dress designer and she's really talented. He took the designs and looked them over. Wow. You weren't kidding about her. I thought these could be a spin off of your line since they're following most of your patterns, just with a higher fashion look. I glanced at the designs as he looked through them. We could call the athletic clothing line Fashionably Fit. This is an amazing idea. He glanced up at me, excitement shining in his eyes and something in me melted. And I love the name Fashionably Fit. Athena! The young woman ran back after her dog and we both looked up. She smiled and waved at us, looking winded. Sorry, she's a puppy and an escape artist. But I needed the run and she's not bothering anyone. No worries. I smiled at her. I didn't mind that her dog was running around. She hadn't even come near us even though we had food. Athena is a great dog's name. Thanks. She wandered closer, her eyes on the papers spread out around and between me and Nick. What a fabulous yoga wear line. Where can I buy them? She asked, as Athena trotted right up and her owner grabbed her collar. Totally Fit, the gym downtown, I said, hoping that this was the validation Nick needed for us to join forces with this new line. Gotcha. I'll tell my friends, too. We're all workout fiends. Let's get you home, Athena. Have a great day. She waved at us and we waved back before she headed off, with her happy puppy in tow. See? She loved the designs and we weren't even trying to find a customer. This is going to be big, I said. Let's do it, he said, pulling me close beside him. You're always talking about work. Why don't we just enjoy the rest of the afternoon without talking business? Something I never thought I'd hear you say, I said, giggling as he tickled my neck with feather kisses. Then he kissed me long and deep, making me sigh with contentment. Could a relationship really be this easy? Wait, were we in a relationship? I wasn't sure what he thought. Tell me something about you, Nick. Do you have a sister? Brother? He shook his head. Cousins. Lots of cousins. Here and in Italy. The image of him with a bunch of cousins sounded fun, but it wasn't lost on me that if he didn't have a sister, I had no idea who he'd been talking to on the phone that day. I pushed it from my mind. What else can you tell me about yourself? He spread his hands. I'm an open book. What do you want to know? I thought for a moment. The wind picked up a little bit, so we gathered up the designs and I slipped them safely back in my purse. And just like that, I'd put away the work conversations. I felt like we could focus on being personal now. Why don't you tell me about your most serious relationship? Okay, he took a sip of cider and I picked up my food and promptly mixed my barbecue and salad together while I waited for his answer. I dated a girl in college. She was my first real love. Go on, I said, wondering if she had been in love with him, too, and what had made them break up. We dated for a few years. He stared into his drink and I sensed he was lost in memories. The hurt in his eyes told me more than his words did and I ached for him. She didn't trust me. Not because of anything I did, but because she had trust issues. Her parents had a bad relationship and her dad left when she was young. But there was never anything I could do to prove myself to her. That's hard. Like a no-win situation. Exactly. His eyes met mine. I can't tell you how much it hurt to know no matter what I did, she'd never trust me. Eventually we went our separate ways. I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to say. I hadn't meant to drag up painful memories. Don't be. I'm glad to share with you. He smiled at me, but his eyes still looked a little sad. I haven't dated anyone special since her. Not really. Until now. My breath caught as his dark eyes captured mine. Me? He nodded and my heart fluttered in my chest. You. Well, yeah, I'm an awesome business partner. I tried to brush off what he was saying. What's not to like? I think we'll do well together in business. But if you told me you never wanted to work with me again, that wouldn't change how I feel about you, Missy. You're like no woman I've ever met before. I've been told I can be a bit of a workaholic. No way, I said, sarcastically. Yes. He spoke softly, destroying every rebuttal I'd been formulating. I'm not sure how it happened, but the truth is that you're more important to me. More than you know. My heart skipped a beat. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. His lips curved a little at the corners and his eyes warmed on mine. I need some time to process what you've told me, I said, thinking things were going so fast. I didn't want them to slow down, but my emotions were in high gear and I needed to think everything through. The honesty felt good, but his words left me feeling too warm and overly happy. It overwhelmed me. Take your time. I've been thinking about us a lot as well. He filled his glass and mine and I took another bite of my barbecue salad mix and washed it down with a drink of the sparkling cider. Spending time with you is wonderful. I feel the same way. As far as business, I gave him an excited smile. He arched an eyebrow at me. I'm listening. I watched as he settled back a bit, planting both feet on the blanket and bringing his knees up. He loosely looped his arms around his legs and watched me as if I were the only person in the world, which only made me feel warmer. I'd like to propose a partnership regarding the upscale athletic wear line with you, me, and Claire. I smiled at the surprise in his eyes. She drew up the plans and made the alterations to your designs with my input. But our work is based on your original line. You're a remarkable businesswoman, he said. Thank you. I nodded. I appreciate you being so open with me, Nick. I'm not used to such honesty and directness, and it's nice. Really nice. And I like you, too. I like you a lot, Nick. I'm a lucky man. He shifted to his knees, leaned close to me as I set aside my food, and then he cupped my face in both his hands. His warm lips met mine and the last worry in me melted away. It was just the two of us here by the river and nothing else mattered. Chapter 12. This view is incredible, I said, gazing out at the twinkle of the downtown city lights from my spot on the 20th floor terrace of the Jeffries Hotel on Friday night. When I'd rescued that little dog over a month ago, the boy's uncle, Evan White, had taken my business card. Evan reached out to me last week with an invitation to his sister's fancy birthday party, and I brought Nick as my +1. I glanced over my shoulder at Nick, who looked very handsome in a black suit and red tie. "What do you think of this view, Nick?" "Incredible." He flashed me a smile that made my belly flutter. Who would have thought saving a puppy on our very first meeting would lead us here? Fun twist, right? I said, smoothing down the skirt of my sparkly black strapless evening gown. Always fun to go out with you. Nick stepped closer to me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. By the way, we have a news conference scheduled for the new clothing line launch a week from Monday. All of the Sacramento media will be there. I asked my assistant to send you the information. I'm excited to be your partner in Fashionably Fit. Chills danced up my spine. I'm excited, too. But business aside, I have to tell you that. I'm glad you two could make it, came a male voice from behind me. I turned around and put a hand to my chest, touching the bare skin around my collarbone, which was warm from the hot summer night. "Oh, hi, Evan. Lovely party. Thanks again for the invitation. The least I could do for Muffy's rescuer." He gave me a chaste kiss on the cheek and then he introduced himself to Nick. "Pleasure to meet you, Nick," he said. "You as well." Nick shook Evan's hand and then gazed around the terrace, which was lavishly decorated in a unique pilot theme. "What kind of business are you in, Evan? Aviation?" "No, that's my sister." Evan chuckled good-naturedly. "She's a commercial airline pilot. I'm in commercial real estate." "Aw. Very lucrative choice." Nick's easy comment earned him a companionable slap on the shoulder from the other man. "I can't complain. They say in love and business, when you know, you know." "Who says that?" Nick asked, rubbing the back of his neck and glancing at me, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Actually, I'm the one who says that," Evan said, chuckling. Original quote. "In love and business, when you know, you know." "I like that saying," I said, giving Nick a meaningful look before turning back to our host. "So, have you been as lucky in love?" "Not yet," Evan said, a line forming between his brows that made me wonder if a past girlfriend had broken his heart. If so, I could relate. Although my heart was well healed now and I couldn't imagine being with anyone else besides Nick. We just fit together, like our new line of athletic wear. After a long pause, Evan cleared his throat. "I really did want to say thank you again in person for saving Muffy." "Muffy, huh?" Nick asked. Evan shrugged. "Not my choice, mind you." "I think it's cute," I said. "Wyatt, my nephew, is a good kiddo. He came up with the name, of course." "Thanks to you, Missy, that pup is doing better than ever." "I'm glad I was in the right place at the right time," I said, glancing at Nick. "In fact, that's how I met Nick. So I should actually thank Wyatt for losing his dog the next time I see him." "Is that so?" Evan's eyebrows rose. "Watching you two together tonight, I would have guessed you'd been together for years." "Sometimes it feels like it," Nick said, his gaze locking with mine in a way that made my heart rate kick up. Then he glanced over my shoulder. "Looks like you're being paged, Evan." Evan turned in the direction of the woman, who had similar features to his, probably his sister, who was flagging him over. "Please excuse me," he said. "Enjoy yourselves." "Thanks," I said, watching him go before turning to Nick. "Should we go inside and see the rest of these cool pilot-themed decorations?" I heard someone say they brought in an ice sculpture. An ice sculpture? This I have to see. He took my hand and we headed inside together, leaving the hot air on the terrace and stepping into the air-conditioned room. A stage was set up against the far wall with a cover band playing Firework by Katy Perry. Many guests were dancing to the beat and I couldn't help wondering if there would be fireworks later. With the kind of money spent on this party, I wouldn't doubt it. Nick lifted his chin in the direction of the wooden stage. Check out the band's attire. Huh? I glanced over and saw the singer dressed as an airline pilot and the rest of the band members dressed as flight attendants. I clasped my hands together. That is awesome. So unique. There's the ice sculpture. He gestured toward the buffet table and next to it was a table with a giant airplane-shaped ice sculpture sitting on a crystal stand with a white tablecloth. He really went all out for his sister. I heard someone say she's his only family, I said, pointing toward a tall marble pedestal beside the ice sculpture. What's that gold ball? Let's find out. He kept my hand in his as we walked toward the pedestal. It looks like the Earth. That's really beautiful. I studied the gold-plated globe, which had a gold wire stretching above it with an airplane flying over the globe. Written on the airplane was "Happy Birthday, Melinda." Clearly custom-made, he said, giving a polite nod to another couple who walked up next to us to admire the artwork, too. Next, we walked to another exhibit which was a glass case containing an antique-looking airline pilot's outfit. The bronze plaque red vintage pilot uniform. I wonder where he found that, he said. I shrugged. Private collection, most likely. Very sweet. Nick nodded, turning to me. If I ever throw you a party, how will I top this? I'd like my ice sculpture to be wearing fashionably fit attire, please, I said, laughing. I'll make note of that, he whispered, his breath tickling the skin behind my ear. Then he brushed his lips against my skin in a soft kiss. Would you like to dance? Yes, I'd love to, I said, tingles skittering along my skin. I couldn't believe the way Nick affected me. I'd never had a connection like this with someone before and felt so lucky. Thank goodness for Muffy. The band started up their next fast song, California Girls by Katy Perry, who I'd guess was Melinda's favorite singer. Nick pulled me close and we began to rock back and forth. This isn't a slow song, I whispered. He flashed a grin. Every song can be a slow dance if you really like who you're with. I lifted my lashes. I'm glad we're slow dancing then. Me, too. His eyes searched mine and I wondered what he was thinking. I have to confess something to you, Missy. Most of my life has been focused on work, getting ahead of the game and staying ahead. But when I'm with you, all of that fades away. My belly fluttered. Your secret is safe with me. The corners of his mouth lifted. Perfect. If it hadn't taken you 3 tries at folding clothes, I'd say you were perfect, I said, watching the color of his eyes deepen. Instead, I'll just say you're perfect for me. He held me a little tighter. We're perfect for each other. I lifted my lashes as he leaned down and pressed his lips to mine, making me feel like something had been missing in my life and now it had been found. When he pulled away, I let out a sigh of contentment. If I had a camera, I'd capture this moment to remember forever. Digital age to the rescue, he said, pulling a cell phone out of his pocket. Then he lifted the phone out in front of us, put his cheek to mine, and we smiled for a quick selfie. My smile held everything I was feeling, how much fun I had with Nick, how easy and natural it felt between us, and how I'd completely fallen for him. For the first time, I had faith that what we had was real and that we'd work out long-term as a couple. Maybe even forever. He brought the phone down and showed me the adorable photo. Consider the moment commemorated, he said. My heart warmed. Send me a copy. Just what I was about to do, he said, a smile on his lips as he tapped the pad of his finger against his cell phone. I stared at the screen, watching the message to me disappear with a cheery zoop. I was about to pull my gaze away from the screen when a photo of a blonde woman named Kennedy Sinclair popped up with a text, "I left my jacket at your place last night. Can I swing by and get it?" My heart dropped to my stomach and alarms went off in my head. I blinked, staring at the beautiful blonde, who had apparently been at Nick's house last night. He and I never had to say the words that we were a couple because it seemed so obvious we were meant for each other. Kindred spirits. Was it possible he was seeing someone else? Duh. Why else would a woman be over at his place at night without him mentioning it to me? My stomach knotted and it felt like the time I'd found out my ex had cheated on me, but worse. If I were honest, something had always been a little off with my ex, but with Nick? All of my feelings for him seemed rooted deep in my heart and soul. I'd thought he was perfect for me. We're perfect for each other. His words from earlier echoed in my head, taunting me. My eyes burned and my face went numb. I remembered taking a Zumba class from Kennedy at Totally Fit. Why had he never mentioned she was at his place? Nick was obviously seeing her romantically, which meant I'd been cheated on. Again. A searing hot stab pierced my heart. I'd known not to pursue a relationship. Why hadn't I listened to my own advice? This was my last thought as my happiness crumbled into pieces. I paced back and forth in front of the full-length mirror in the ladies' lounge area. The navy and gold carpet under my feet swallowed up the sound of my heels. I finally stopped before I wore out the carpet and turned to face the mirror. Blinking back the tears that kept threatening, I took deep breaths, unable to believe my bad luck. Kennedy had left her jacket at Nick's place last night? With both hands, I adjusted the top of my black strapless gown. How had I let this happen again? Was something wrong with me? Why did every guy feel the need to cheat? Wasn't one woman enough? I met my gaze in the mirror, noting the welling tears in my eyes and the tightening of my throat. Getting my heart broken for the second time in such a fashion didn't seem possible. My black waves hung perfectly around my face and my makeup was flawless. With one single perfect pink nail, I touched my temple and nudged a tiny curl off my face. At least I didn't look like my heart had been smashed. That was something. "I love your dress," a woman said, giving me a smile. "Thank you." I flashed her a grin I didn't feel as she slipped out the door. I let out a long breath, knowing I needed to face Nick. I couldn't hide out in the women's lounge forever, unfortunately. I mean, I'd already been in here for 20 minutes. What must he think of me right now? But I didn't know what to say to him. What needed to be said after I find out that a woman had secretly been over at his place last night? Well, I at least had to tell him it was over between us. I couldn't be the other woman. Putting on my brave face, I stepped out of the lounge to find Nick right outside as if he'd been about to come in and ended up smacking right into his chest with an oof. "Sorry, I thought you'd be in with the band still," I said, noticing the look of concern in his incredible brown eyes. "I came looking for you." "Are you okay?" he asked. No. "Yes, I'm fine," I lied. "You looked upset when you dashed off." "Whatever's going on, I'm here for you." He put both hands on my shoulders and ducked his head to look me in the eyes. I turned away from his stare. If I looked him in the eyes, I might lose this determination to tell him we were done. Taking a deep breath, I said, "Nick, it's over." "What's over?" He didn't sound upset or mad, just stunned. His hands also fell away from my shoulders. "We're over. I'm breaking up with you." "I'm sorry," I said, even though I wasn't the one who should be sorry. After all, I wasn't the one seeing someone else. My heart ached and I blinked back tears. I wasn't going to cry in public. I could cry when I got home, but for now, I needed to be strong. What's going on, Missy? Was it something I did? His voice rose a tiny bit and I met his gaze. Now or never. I needed to be honest. For my own sake, at least. I don't like that you hide things from me, I said, because it didn't feel right to not tell him the truth. I wanted to talk about my concerns, but I also didn't want to hear excuses or stories. I'd heard enough of those when Kyle ran off with my maid of honor. What did I hide from you? He asked, seeming uneasy, but also incredulous as he shifted his weight and took my arm, gently moving me away from the flow of people. It doesn't matter, I said, since there wasn't a graceful way to dodge that question. My heart broke in my chest and I swallowed back the pain as I glanced at everything other than him. What matters is that we're done. That's the bottom line. He faltered back a step. Missy, I meant what I said about us being perfect together. I did, too, I said, a slice of pain stabbing my heart. This was worse than I thought, worse than it had been with Kyle. At least Kyle had been honest when I'd confronted him. So then where is this coming from? He raked a hand through his hair and then he swept a hand toward the party. The beat of the music thumped and the sounds of people talking, laughing, and being merry filled my ears. We were happy and having fun just a little while ago. Everything was perfect. What happened? You tell me. I stared up at him, crossing my arms. Why was Kennedy Sinclair at your home last night? I saw her text that she'd left her jacket at your place. Is that what this was about? He asked, relief washing over his features. I know Kennedy. She's a Zumba instructor at Totally Fit. I've taken one of her classes. Okay. Bosses don't have their employees come to their houses, especially at night, I said, pointing out the obvious. A woman walked by heading toward the women's lounge. She eyed Nick suspiciously after having overheard what I'd said. How embarrassing. When the door closed behind her, I asked Nick directly, so why was she at your place? An annoyed tick jumped above his right eye. I can't tell you that. Why not? You are hiding things from me. His lips tightened into a thin line. There is a reason, but I can't tell you what it is, Missy. I swear I'm not interested in Kennedy that way, though. She's my employee. Nothing more. Which was exactly what someone cheating would say, right? So Kennedy knows what the reason is and not me? Why would that be if there isn't anything going on between you two? His eyebrows slashed low over his eyes. You'll just have to trust that I have a good reason. I wanted to trust him, I really did. But all of the signs of infidelity were there. And the thought that he trusted Kennedy and not me really stung. My eyes watered and my mind raced, trying to find a valid reason that a woman would be at her boss's place. Nothing came to mind. You told me something at the opera that put me at ease, I said, remembering that first date as clearly as if it had been yesterday. You said that real men don't cheat, but here you are, sneaking around with Kennedy. He shook his head. You really have me pegged as the bad guy, don't you? Do I? Think about it from my point of view. I blinked the tears back and tapped my fingertip against my cheek. We met and you thought I could help bring in more business for you. You wanted me to model for you after I told you I quit and put that life behind me. Now it turns out that you Kennedy have a really close relationship where she keeps your secrets. That's far closer than any boss and employee should be, in my opinion. He looked ready to blow his top, but I wasn't done. Missy, So from over here in my heels, it looks like I was a shiny business opportunity while you kept the woman you were really interested in on the side. A spiked lump swelled in my throat, painfully choking up at my last words. I hated to admit it, but that scenario made sense. "That's what you think of me?" he asked, for the first time sounding angry. I'd never heard Nick sound upset with me, and the feeling was unnerving, not as unnerving as being deceived, though. "You can't just trust me? I'm not Kyle. I'm not your scummy, cheating ex." My heart screamed at me to trust him, but my head whispered that the signs were obvious he was cheating. It wasn't like he was willing to give me a reason for her being at his place, even though he claimed to have one. "You know I've been cheated on. If you weren't doing the same, then wouldn't you justify what she was doing there? Why should I have to tell you the reason when I've done nothing wrong? I'm not the one who hurt you, and I shouldn't have to pay for some jerk's mistakes." Wow. He really didn't get it, did he? "Did you even hear a word I said?" "Yeah, and I'm done listening." He shook his head and let out a mirthless chuckle. "Let's go. I'll take you home." My stomach roiled. "No, thanks. I'd rather take a cab." And with one last look at him, I calmly strode away on my high heels, never looking back and never letting him know how he'd broken my heart. Chapter 13. On Monday of the following week, I hoped my morning coffee would clear my head after a terrible night's sleep and help me come to terms with losing Nick. I'd been miserable the past 9 days without Nick. He hadn't called or texted me either. Not that he should. I mean, I was pretty clear. But it still bothered me for some reason. My mind had gone over everything from Friday night 1,000 times, confirming I'd made the right decision. So why did everything feel so wrong? I walked a little faster, my pink heels clicking along the pavement. The morning air whispered through my hair, and I took a deep breath as if that might help against the pain crushing my chest right now. The breakdown was simple. I told him I didn't appreciate him seeing another woman behind my back, and yet he'd offered no explanation as to why she was at his place that night. So I left. I mean, what sane woman would stick around for more of that? Stripping the breakup down to just the words helped me deal with the emotional fallout, the soul-crushing ache of having been betrayed again, the self-doubt, the sadness because everything had seemed so perfect before that stupid text. "Have you been sleeping?" Courtney asked, giving me a concerned look as I approached her coffee cart. "You have massive bags under your eyes." "Sorry, just noticing." "Not enough sleep," I said, standing to the side as she helped another customer with his drink order. As usual, she had a gaggle of people waiting, but I stood there, totally aware that her coffee was worth waiting for. "Oh. Something happened with Nick?" she asked, searching my face with worried eyes. "What makes you say that?" I shrugged, not wanting to discuss my problems in front of a line full of groggy-eyed strangers looking for a caffeine fix. It didn't seem right to depress anyone before they had their first cup of coffee. "Give me 3 minutes," she said, turning to smile at the person 2 spots in front of me. After a few minutes, I stepped forward and ordered a coffee, black. Now I know this is serious. "You never order black. You don't even like your coffee black." "I'll make you a 20-ounce non-fat latte with 1 pump of sugar-free vanilla and a sprinkle of cinnamon, while you tell me what really happened." "We didn't work out," I said, wanting to go back to bed and curl up under the covers so I could cry into my pillow. "But I had to be at work soon." "Why?" "What happened?" she asked, tamping down the coffee grounds. "Not to sound cliché, but you seemed perfect for each other." There was a text. From a woman. "I think he's seeing someone else." She snorted. "Oh, wait. You're serious?" "Unfortunately, I am." I nodded as she hesitated, staring at me and forgetting about the steaming milk under her wand. I wish I wasn't serious, but there you have it. What did he do to make you think that? She asked, adding milk to the coffee in the to-go cup and then scooping frothed milk on top of that. I saw the text from a woman, I said, suddenly feeling like it sounded so caught red-handed. She said she left her jacket at his place. She grabbed a little spice container and added a sprinkle of cinnamon to the top and then pressed it into my hands. It's on the house today. Oh, no. Your coffee is worth paying for. I handed her the money. Hold on a sec. Courtney took the next person's order and then whipped together another cup of coffee to go. So you were checking Nick's texts? Oh, no. I'd never do that, I said, thinking that if I had to check a guy's texts then I clearly didn't trust him. But I had trusted Nick, which was one of the reasons our breakup still didn't feel right to me. He took a selfie of us and the text popped up while we were looking at the picture. Oh, phew. I was going to say, girl, you've got bigger problems than not trusting him if you're going through his phone. She laughed and then handed the next woman her coffee with a smile. Luckily, there was a lull and so it was just the two of us now. Missy, I hate to be the one to break it to you. But you need to go all in with Nick. What do you mean? I did. No, I mean all in, she said, giving me a raised eyebrow. Has he ever given you a reason to doubt him? Well, not until I saw the text. But he's a good guy, Missy. Trust me, you know the schmucks I see come through here every day. She put a hand on my forearm. You clearly have feelings for him and I can tell he feels the same way about you. I don't think you're scared he's seeing someone else, I think you're scared because you've been hurt before. I don't know, I said, considering what she said. I really didn't want to be hurt again. But the text looked really bad for him. Did you give him a chance to explain himself? She asked, stepping forward to the counter to take another couple of orders. Yes, but he refused. Why? I shrugged. He said he had his reasons and that I should trust him. But isn't that what someone who was cheating would say? You tell me. Is that what your ex said? Well, no. He denied the few times I'd had clues and then only admitted it when he'd been caught directly. Look, she said, taking a new order and smiling at the man before the espresso machine started whirring once more. Nick is not Kyle. He's not a cheater. You know that and I know that. Whatever is going on with that text, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Give him a chance to tell you what that reason is. Look how miserable you are. Maybe I'm miserable because we broke up, I said, beginning to realize that might not actually be true. Or maybe you're miserable because you love him and you know you pushed him away. I blinked. Did I do that? You tell me, she said, giving me a long, soft look. There was a long silent pause and tears welled in my eyes. Have I made an excuse to push Nick away? Was I that scared of being hurt again? Only you know the answer to that, she said. A single hot tear slipped down my cheek and a weight lifted from my shoulders. I didn't even realize it until now, but you may be right. It's hard to let your guard down. Believe me, I know. 5 years divorced and I haven't dated yet. You're braver than you think. Oh, Courtney, I put a palm to my forehead realizing she was utterly and totally right. Thank you so much for pointing this out to me. I feel like I've made such a mess of everything. Cut yourself a break. Love can be hard. But it can also be worth it. I've seen it happen with my own eyes. So have you. Think of friends you know who are happy in their relationships. Was it smooth sailing to get where they are now? I pictured my good friend Claire and the love of her life, Alex. She'd literally waited a decade for him and they were blissfully happy now. What should I do, Courtney? You need to go get your man. My stomach bubbled with worry as I realized she was right. What if he won't take me back? You're a smart businesswoman. I'm sure you know how to get what you want. And what I wanted was Nick. I thanked her and gave her a quick hug. Then, with my coffee in hand and my head held high, I headed for Fashionably Late. Chapter 14. A few minutes later, I arrived at my upscale clothing boutique and saw Michelle standing outside the front door waiting for me. "You're late," she said. "How do you think I came up with the name of my store?" I joked, gesturing up at the Fashionably Late sign. "Thanks for offering to come help me rearrange the store to get ready for the news conference." "You're welcome. But in exchange you have to tell me what's going on with you." "You seem quiet lately," she said, opening the door. I hadn't told her anything about Nick, mostly because I felt guilty tearing her away from her typing since she finally seemed to have inspiration somehow. "Dish and tell me everything." "Let's get inside first," I said, as we stepped into the store to find Lisa helping a customer. "Okay, we're inside." Michelle closed the door behind us. "What's going on?" I sighed, tucking a lock of hair behind my ear. "I haven't wanted to bother you with my issues because you've been so busy writing. I knew you had writer's block." "Shoo. You can't say those two words aloud." "It's bad luck," she said, holding her arms up and ducking as if trying to ward off an invisible writing enemy or something. "Okay," I said, holding in a laugh. "I didn't want to bug you when I knew you were having trouble coming up with the right words for your book." She puckered her lips to her nose and nodded. "Improvement. Go on." I let out a sigh of relief. The words seemed to be free-flowing this past week and I didn't want to break your rhythm by telling you my bad news. "How's the writing going?" "Amazing. My muse is inspired thanks to you." "Me?" She nodded. "Your love story with Nick has inspired me to write a modern-day fairy tale romance," she said, smiling. "The words have never come faster or easier. So, thanks to you both for your connection and inspiration." "Nick and I split up last weekend," I blurted, walking over to a rack I needed to move and started pulling the clothing off of it. She gasped, moving to the other side of the rack to help. "Oh, no. This must be the week for breakups because Krista and Lance broke up." "Is that the firefighter who works with Lucy's boyfriend?" I asked. "Yes, apparently they had nothing in common. Too bad because he seemed nice. You can't force it if it's not there, though." "What happened between you and Nick?" "It's not a pretty story," I said, moving an armful of clothing onto a temp rack I'd brought out last night to help me this morning. "He and I went out on Friday night to a private party hosted by the guy who is the uncle of the boy whose puppy I saved." Uncle. Boy. Puppy. Party. Got it. "Go on," she said, moving a set of blouses to the temporary rack. "We were having a great time and everything seemed fine. But then he took a selfie of us and while we were looking at it, he got a text from a woman saying she left her coat at his place." "Oh, no." Michelle paused and looked stunned. "I didn't see that one coming." "Me either," I assured her. She suddenly snapped her fingers and gave me a hopeful look. Plot twist, she was his sister, who is visiting. I shook my head. She's an employee of his at Totally Fit. A beautiful, blonde Zumba instructor. I lifted my shoulders as she placed her armful of clothing on the extra rack. Together we lifted and moved the rack to its new home against the wall. She wrinkled her nose. That does not bode well. Courtney says I need to trust him because he's never given me a reason not to trust him. Makes sense. I mean, besides the woman at his place, Michelle said, raising her eyebrows. But if there's never been a red flag and he's an honest person, then there must be an explanation. Maybe they're good friends? Then why wouldn't he just say that? Good point. Why did he say she was at his place? Did you ask? He said he couldn't tell me right now. I pulled the rolling rack over and began to hang the clothing back up. Michelle hurried to help, splitting the stack and hanging things up. He did say that it wasn't what it looked like. I was just so surprised by her photo on the screen and her leaving her jacket there and him never mentioning she was at his house or that they were friends. I panicked. I just couldn't listen to reason, you know? She nodded. Yes, I get it. I sighed. Courtney also thinks I should go all in, as she put it. She doesn't think I was truly opening myself up to him, and maybe she's right. We moved on to the next rack. This time, we removed the folded clothing from the racks and stacked them neatly in a box. I was grateful for Michelle's help and company. Thank you for being here. Of course, Missy. I do like her advice about going all in. She adjusted one of the folded shirts, trying to fix the fold line in it. The motion reminded me of how Nick folded things, which gave me a dull ache in my heart. So, that's why I've been quiet all week. What about you? How are you doing? You know what I just thought. I haven't been going all in with my writing before this week. What do you mean? I asked. Well, she hesitated, unfolding and refolding the shirt while I added another neatly folded stack to the box. I've been trying to write a story I think will sell. And that's a problem? I asked, not understanding. I had to buy things I thought would sell. That's business. True. She nodded, setting a shirt aside. But that's not how my muse works. Once I focused on a story from the heart, the words started coming. Will I make money on it? Who knows? They don't call people like me a starving artist for nothing. I gave her a small smile. I love your writing and can't wait to read your book. She shrugged. Writing is a leap of faith. That others will enjoy the story in your head that you've typed out for them. But it has to come from my heart, or it won't come at all. You're right, I said, thinking everything should come from the heart, of course. Even though I ordered clothing that would sell, I made sure that my heart was in every choice. I had to fully believe in everything I put on my shelves. I'm going to have to tell Courtney she was right about the both of us, I joked, and Michelle giggled. Sorry for derailing things. That was just such great advice I had to chime in how it applied to my life, she said, arranging piles of shirts together neatly by color. Don't apologize. I'm really proud of you. I handed her another stack of shirts. She placed them beside the stack she'd already made perfect. Proud of me? She asked, sounding surprised. Why? You've been struggling with this, but you've never given up. I smiled, feeling bad for her at the same time. She'd been doing her best with no luck for a while now. You've figured out how to write from the heart and you're going for it. All in. I'm proud of you. She nodded. I need to be brave like you. I glanced at Michelle while biting my bottom lip. I'm in love with Nick. I want him to be my future. My friend smiled at me. I'm going to second Courtney's advice then and say you need to go after him. I nodded, biting my bottom lip, and wondering how Nick felt about me now. There was only one way to find out. I'd have to go all in. Chapter 15. By the early afternoon, Fashionably Late looked like a totally different place. Not only was it decorated differently and packed with people, but there were reporters everywhere. I'd been in the back room earlier when Kennedy Sinclair from Totally Fit stopped by and delivered a fashionably fit outfit sample to Michelle. Kennedy had told Michelle that Nick had this sample designed by Claire as a surprise for me, so I could share more than just the artwork of the new clothing line at the press conference. Kennedy had also told Michelle that when she'd received the designs via express delivery from my friend Claire Davenport in Blue Moon Bay, she'd rushed them over to Nick's place. That way, he could choose a look for the sample and she could get the design to the seamstress since they were on a tight deadline to get the outfit made. I wanted to smack my forehead against the cash register when Michelle told me this since it confirmed the good reason Nick's employee had been at his place, a surprise for me. All I could do at this point was to face Nick and apologize. What happened after that would be up to him, but I had to be all in this time. I lifted my chin, ready to face the crowd, my excitement over this way to expand my business dulled because I hadn't been sharing the joy with Nick. My nerves were fraught over seeing Nick soon, but I focused on my upcoming speech. I walked forward, waving hello to the announcer from Sacramento Social Scene, aka Triple S. Then I spotted Nick, who waved me over to him. I walked over to face Nick, my heart thumping in my chest. "Hi," I said, lamely, wondering if I should start apologizing now or wait until we had a little privacy. To be honest, after seeing those brown eyes, I wasn't sure I could wait any longer. "We need to talk," he said, before I could speak. His brown eyes darted back and forth between mine and I could see the hurt still in them. "It's important." "Okay," I said. "Oh, no." My mind turned to all the worst scenarios. He was going to tell me that not only did he not care about me anymore, but he also didn't want to work with me anymore. Not that I could blame him for that. "Did you want to talk, now?" "And a little birdie just told me that Missy Peters is in the building," the Triple S announcer said, holding the microphone in front of his chin. "Missy Peters, please come to the front, your party is waiting." "And that party would be yours truly, Frankie Brown, who is in the house." The crowd laughed and cheered. "Sorry," I said, giving Nick a forced smile before I headed up to the stage. The hurt look in his eyes stayed with me, though, and I tried to force it out of my mind. "Here she is, everyone." "Finally!" Frankie said, handing me my own microphone. "What can I say?" I asked the announcer. "I'm always fashionably late." He laughed. "Oh, no. She didn't." "Oh, yes. I did," I said, giving everyone a superstar smile and waving to them. "Hey, Missy," Frankie said, glancing around in an exaggerated way. I do believe I saw Nick Zambini, owner of Totally Fit and co-owner of the new Fashionably Fit clothing line we're all raving about. "Where is he hiding? Don't let him slip out the back door, people." "He's here," I said, forcing a winning smile even as my nerves buzzed. "Nick, you'd better get up here. Your fans are waiting," Frankie said, as the crowd clapped and parted for a fashionably dressed Nick. He hurried up on stage with a smile for the announcer and for the crowd and hurt still echoing in his eyes. The announcer handed him a microphone. "Hi, everyone," Nick said, looking out at the audience. "Thanks for coming. It means a lot." The crowd cheered and whistled, clearly in love with Nick. I couldn't blame them. "Now, let's get down to business." Frankie turned to me. "First, Missy, tell us about being a supermodel." "Well," I said, smiling at the crowd. I could see Michelle out there and she gave me a thumbs up. She wasn't the only face I knew, though. I winked at my other friends, Lucy and Jake, Hannah and Krista, Abigail and Cooper, and even Claire and Alex had made it for the occasion. Modeling is hard work and fun, but the hours can be difficult and the traveling is haywire for sleep. Sometimes I miss it, though. Who knows, maybe I'll do a modeling shoot for Fashionably Fit. Is that a promise? Frankie asked. We miss your work. It's a definite maybe, I said, winking at him. Fair enough, he said, nodding to the crowd. So after modeling, you decided to settle down here in Sacramento to try and help other people look runway ready? Love that, Frankie. I'm going to have to use that slogan, I said with a laugh. My motto is to help people look and feel their best. Come to Fashionably Late to find entire outfits, head to toe, so you're ready to go. The crowd went wild and I turned to the S reporter, certain this was going well. In the front row, I noticed Kennedy standing there with a man who had an arm around her as he spoke quietly into her ear, a man that clearly seemed to be her boyfriend. I struggled to keep my smile in place even though I felt like a jealous fool. Oops. You're gorgeous, Missy, Frankie said. And now you're making everyone dress as phenomenally as you do. What a concept that every one of us can be a supermodel, he said, hesitating and waiting for the crowd to stop yelling and whistling. When they finally quieted down a bit, he turned to me. I'm going to be in so much trouble if I don't ask this, so tell me the truth. Are you seeing anyone, Missy? Are you single? I asked. His eyes widened. For you, honey, I'd be so single. But I'm afraid I don't swing that way. I laughed aloud. Guess I'll let you off the hook then. Seriously, though, he said, smiling. What's your status? Inquiring minds want to know. Well, yes, I guess I'm single. I forced a smile as the crowd went wild again. My heart sank, though, and I took a deep breath. I need to give you a more honest answer than that, actually, I said, refusing to glance in Nick's direction even though I could feel him watching me. I couldn't look him in the eyes and see his hurt again, though. I just couldn't. The truth is that I was seeing someone. And he was beyond special. In fact, I'm still crazy about him. A hush fell over the crowd and even Frankie looked stunned. Do tell us what happened. We were seeing each other and everything was perfect until I messed everything up, I said, holding the mic and noticing my hand shaking. I stared weakly at the crowd, uncomfortable with how vulnerable I felt. I could see my friends wearing worried expressions. Do any of you ladies know what I'm talking about? I asked, watching hands spring into the air. Guys, too, for that matter. Raise your hands if you've ever been afraid of getting hurt. Even the announcer had his hand in the air and a smile on his face. Guilty as charged, Frankie said. Suddenly, I noticed Courtney in the crowd, holding her hand up and silent strength in her eyes. I waved at her with my pinky and she winked at me. Well, I hope it's not too late for you and Mr. Wright to patch things up, Frankie said, giving me a sincerely empathetic look. I guarantee you that all of Sacramento is rooting for you, Missy. I'm sure eligible bachelors are crying right now over losing their shot with you, but we all want you to be happy and wish you the best of luck. Thanks for sharing. Well, thank you, I said, feeling utterly uplifted by the huge show of support from him and everyone else. So, Nick, how is business? Frankie asked. Nick glanced over at me with an unreadable look and I glanced away. I didn't want the world to know he was the Mr. Right I'd been talking about, but he was making it really hard to keep that secret with all of his current staring. Frankie widened his eyes when Nick didn't reply. You've recently started cross-marketing a fitness line with Fashionably Late? Frankie asked, prodding Nick again. You mean Fashionably Date? Nick arched a brow at me and the announcer laughed. Nick continued, this time addressing me directly. Seriously, though. If Missy Peters can be completely honest, then I think it's time for Nick Zambini to be honest, as well. Please, Frankie said, looking eager for more. Tell us what's on your mind. I will, Nick said, glancing over at me before looking out at the crowd. Thanks to the owner of this upscale boutique, the truth is that I've had the best dates of my life and I never want them to end. The crowd gasped. I noticed Courtney's mouth curve upward. So, Missy, Nick said, turning to me. I bet you could work things out with this guy you say you're crazy about. I'll even bet he's already forgiven you. My belly did a little flip and my eyes watered. Really? I asked. Whoa, thanks for giving us the inside scoop here, the Triple S announcer said, glancing from Nick to me. Sounds like more has been going on around here besides fashionably fit. Maybe some fashionably firm feelings have formed? Try saying that 5 times fast, I joked, and chuckles rippled through the crowd. You know, Frankie. My entire adult life, I've only been wrapped up in business, Nick said, glancing at the announcer, who nodded like he totally understood. Here we are talking about my new fitness line, my business is growing, which is all fantastic. But that's not what I want to think about right now. There is only one thing that I'm focused on right now. I stared at Nick, thinking I deserved a medal for not having my jaw drop to the floor at his admission. Because that look would so not look good in a news article photo. And what are you focused on, Nick? The announcer sounded excited and the crowd broke out into a murmur of voices. I'd never believed love was worth putting first until I met this woman who changed my mind. His brown eyes locked on mine and my legs turned to spaghetti. She's not afraid to love with her whole heart, but she's afraid of getting hurt. And as someone who loves her, I should understand how she feels. I need to listen better. I shook my head. You're perfect. This woman is quick and sharp and an incredible businessperson, Nick said, turning to the crowd and raising his arm. Oh, she might be late sometimes, he jerked a shoulder up, an off-center grin forming on his lips as laughter rippled through the crowd as if everyone had figured out who he was talking about. The announcer chuckled. I have a feeling you're on dangerous ground now. Oh, I know I am. Nick said, giving me a heart-melting smile. You know, sometimes in life you just have to take a risk. A certain coffee cart owner actually encouraged me to go all in, as she put it. Somewhere in the crowd, Courtney let out a whoop. She'd been talking to Nick, too? I looked over at her and she gave me a wink, but I could hardly see her through the tears blurring my vision. What do you guys think? Nick asked the crowd, holding the mic to his mouth. Don't you think if I'd gone all in then she would have known in her heart that I'd never let her down? The overwhelming chorus of yes, absolutely, and for sure filled the air. I think taking risks and showing your cards is what love is all about, Nick said, facing me again, the corners of his mouth curving upward. With that, he got down on one knee and held out a ring. Missy, I've been in love with you since the moment you tripped and fell into my arms. The crowd awed. I knew you were the woman for me the second you threw yourself into the path of an oncoming bicyclist and risked life, limb, and certain road rash to save a stranger's puppy. The crowd gave hoots of absolute enjoyment and he glanced at them. Right? You see what I mean? This is a fantastic human being. I smiled, my cheeks stinging. I was used to being called pretty. I was used to being told I was a smart businesswoman. But being called a good human sounded like the highest of all praise to my ears. Nick's words touched my heart directly. Get to the good part, Courtney shouted. I giggled, unable to stop the tears of joy from sliding down my cheeks. Nick shot her a glance before looking up at me again. Missy, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I will promise to get you a 20-ounce non-fat latte with 1 pump of sugar-free vanilla and a sprinkle of cinnamon coffee drink from Courtney's coffee cart every morning. The announcer chuckled. And a surprise sponsorship slips into the proposal. Nah, just the best coffee in the city, some random stranger shouted. Nick and I both nodded in agreement. The best coffee, the best advice, and the best heart, that was Courtney Carmichael. Let's have a do-over, Bella, he said, softly, his eyes darting back and forth between mine. Will you make me the happiest man on earth and marry me? I promise I will listen better and always remind you that you're the only one for me. What do you think? And just like that, everyone else faded away and it was just Nick and me. I didn't worry about anyone else. I looked into Nick's eyes and trusted him completely. Trusted the feeling in my gut that told me this was exactly what I wanted and what had been the plan for me all along without my even knowing it. Yes, I'll marry you, Nick, I said, looking into those brown eyes as I gave him my hand. He slipped the ring on my finger and clapping erupted through the crowd as he stood, the stunned look in his eyes making me wonder if he thought I might say no. So, I said it again, yes, Nick. Yes, yes, yes. You heard it here first, folks, the Triple S announcer said. Fashionably Late is a raging success and we know Fashionably Fit will be too. Ex-supermodel Missy Peters owns this place and loves to help people look and feel their best by day. By night, she and the love of her life save puppies. They're just the superhero duo this city needs. Nick grinned ear to ear and pulled me into his powerful arms. Cradled against his hard chest, I lifted my lashes, thinking the only thing that would make this moment better would be if he kissed me. As if he were reading my mind, he lowered his lips to mine and the crowd went wild. The end. If you enjoyed spending time with these characters, be sure to listen to Michelle's story in Once Upon a Date, Do-Over Date series, Book 6. You have been listening to the Dashing Date, Do-Over Date series, Book 5, by Susan Hatler, copyright 2020 by Susan Hatler, audiobook copyright 2023 by Susan Hatler. Susan Hatler is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author who writes humorous and emotional women's fiction and young adult novels. Many of Susan's books have been translated into German, Spanish, French, and Italian. A natural optimist, she believes life is amazing, people are fascinating, and imagination is endless. She loves spending time with her characters and hopes you do, too.